During my graduation dinner, my parents ambushed me with legal papers to transfer my tech patents to my sister. She deserves a future more than you do. My dad claimed, tearing my hard-earned diploma right in front of the entire restaurant. I just smiled, picked up my bag, and walked out. The next morning, a $15 million acquisition offer arrived in my inbox, and that is when everything changed. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut ties with toxic relatives who only saw you as a stepping stone for their golden child. My name is Morgan Reed, 33 years old, and until recently, I was the designated scapegoat of my family. As a data scientist who built an artificial intelligence startup from the ground up, I thought earning my executive MBA would finally make my parents proud. Instead, it became the night they tried to steal my life's work. The private dining room at an upscale seafood restaurant in downtown Seattle was supposed to be a celebration. The crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the white linen tablecloths, and expensive wine glasses clinked as the waiters moved silently around us. But sitting across from my parents, Richard and Patricia, I felt the familiar, suffocating chill of their disapproval. To my left sat my younger sister Brittany, a 29-year-old lifestyle influencer whose designer dress could not hide the desperate panic in her eyes. Beside her was her husband Isaiah, a sharp, highly successful African-American venture capitalist who always looked at me like I was a failing stock he was trying to short. We had barely finished our appetizers when the atmosphere aggressively shifted. My father did not offer a toast to my graduation. He did not mention the grueling nights I spent balancing my startup with my master's program. Instead, Richard reached into his tailored suit jacket, pulled out a thick stack of legal documents, and tossed them onto the table. The heavy thud made the silverware rattle. I looked down at the bold, capitalized letters on the first page. It read, "Intellectual Property Transfer Agreement." "What is this?" I asked, my voice completely steady, despite the sudden drop in my stomach. "It is a solution to a family crisis," my father said, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the table. "Brittany's cosmetic company is going under. Her investors are pulling out and she is facing bankruptcy. We need your artificial intelligence algorithm to pivot her business model and secure a new round of funding. You are going to sign over the patent rights to her tonight." I stared at him, genuinely wondering if he had lost his mind. "You want me to give my predictive medical analysis algorithm a complex technology I spent 3 years coding from scratch to a failing makeup brand?" My mother. Patricia slammed her wine glass down her face, twisting with sudden anger. "You are such a selfish child, Morgan. That useless tech project of yours is doing nothing but sitting on a server taking up space. Brittany actually has an audience. She needs this to save her brand and her reputation. You owe this family. Your father let you live in our basement for 4 years during college. You should be grateful we are even giving you a seat at this table." I looked at my mother, refusing to break eye contact, letting the years of emotional abuse fuel my clarity. "I lived in a damp, unfinished basement that flooded every spring," I replied, enunciating every word clearly so there could be no misunderstanding. "And I paid you $800 a month in rent to stay there. Meanwhile, you drained my college savings account to pay the deposit for Brittany and Isaiah's lavish destination wedding. I do not owe this family a single dime, and I certainly do not owe you my intellectual property." Isaiah chuckled softly, shaking his head with an arrogant smirk. "Come on, Morgan. You are a data scientist, not a business mogul. You do not know how to monetize this asset properly. Brittany has the brand image. I have the venture capital connections. We take your code, rebrand it as an AI beauty matching tool, and we all win. Do not be stubborn. You are completely out of your depth here, and we are throwing you a lifeline." I reached across the table and pushed the legal documents back toward my father. "I am not signing anything," I said calmly. "My algorithm is designed to predict cellular mutations, not match lipstick shades." I am not letting you butcher my life's work to bail out a vanity project that failed because Brittany spent her startup capital on designer handbags instead of product development. My father's face turned a violent shade of red. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. Other diners in the restaurant stopped eating and turned to stare, but Richard did not care about causing a scene. He reached over and grabbed the leather folder containing my newly awarded executive MBA diploma, the very reason we were supposedly celebrating tonight. "You ungrateful, pathetic failure," he spat, his voice echoing through the elegant dining room. He gripped the thick parchment with both hands and ripped it right down the middle, the sound of tearing paper slicing through the sudden silence of the restaurant. He threw the torn halves directly at my chest, letting them flutter down onto my plate. "A piece of paper does not make you successful. You are nothing without this family's backing. Sign the transfer right now or you are no longer my daughter. Walk out that door and you are dead to us." Brittany looked at me with a smug, expectant smirk, waiting for me to break down, apologize, and surrender, just like I always did when we were kids. Patricia crossed her arms, nodding in aggressive agreement with my father's cruel ultimatum. Isaiah just watched, clearly expecting me to fold under the pressure. But they had miscalculated terribly. The scared girl, who used to cry for their approval, had died a long time ago, buried under years of their blatant favoritism and manipulation. I looked down at the torn pieces of my diploma, then back up at the 4 people who shared my blood, but never my heart. I smiled. It was a cold, empty smile that made Brittany's confident smirk immediately falter. I picked up my purse, stood up, and smoothed the front of my dress. "Keep the scraps, Richard," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent room so every patron could hear. "I already have the knowledge in my head, and you clearly need the paper to feel important. Have a wonderful evening." I turned and walked out of the restaurant, my heels clicking rhythmically against the marble floor. I did not look back. I did not shed a single tear. I stepped out into the cool Seattle night air and hailed a cab, feeling an overwhelming, intoxicating sense of liberation. Let them disown me. Let them think they had won this battle. They had no idea that while they were busy trying to steal my work to save a sinking ship, I was already negotiating with industry giants. Because the very next morning, an email from the CEO of Apex Health would land in my inbox carrying an official acquisition offer of $15 million and triggering a ruthless war that would cost my family absolutely everything. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of my downtown Seattle apartment, casting long geometric shadows across the hardwood floor. I sat on the edge of my bed, a steaming mug of black coffee in my hand, and stared at my phone resting on the nightstand. Part of me, the inner child that had spent 3 decades begging for crumbs of affection, anticipated a text. A missed call. A half-hearted apology from my mother claiming my father was just stressed about Brittany and her failing business. I picked up the device and unlocked the screen. Nothing. Not a single missed call. There was only one text message sent at 2 in the morning from my mother, Patricia. It read, "You humiliated us in front of the entire restaurant. We expect a formal apology and the signed transfer documents by Monday morning, or you can forget about coming to Thanksgiving this year." I read the words twice, feeling a strange, profound sense of peace wash over me. There was no sadness left. The threat of being excluded from a holiday dinner, a dinner where I was usually relegated to the corner seat and ignored while everyone praised Brittany, felt like a gift rather than a punishment. I tapped the screen, blocked my mother's number, and then proceeded to block my father, my sister, and my arrogant brother-in-law, Isaiah. The digital cord was officially cut. I was free. I walked over to my home office setup and opened my encrypted laptop. My startup, NeuroPredict Analytics, was essentially just me, a handful of contracted cloud servers, and 3 years of relentless coding. I clicked on my secure business email client. At the very top of the inbox, marked with high importance, was an unread message from the Chief Technology Officer of Apex Health. Apex Health was a massive multinational healthcare conglomerate. We had been in quiet, rigorous technical discussions for the past 2 months. Their data scientists had been testing a sandboxed version of my predictive algorithm, the exact same algorithm my father had dismissed as a useless tech project. I clicked open the email. My eyes scanned the formal corporate letterhead, skipping past the pleasantries and landing directly on the bolded financial terms of their official acquisition offer. $15 million. I stopped breathing for a full 10 seconds. I leaned closer to the monitor, my eyes tracing the zeros. $15 million. $10 million in an immediate cash payout upon closing and $5 million in restricted stock units, vesting over a 3-year period contingent on me joining Apex Health as their new director of data science. I placed my coffee mug on the desk because my hands were suddenly shaking too violently to hold it. $15 million for the code my family wanted me to give away for free to save a failing cosmetics brand. I pressed my palms against my eyes and let out a sound that was half laugh and half sob. It was the ultimate vindication. They had called me a failure. They had torn my diploma to shreds. And less than 12 hours later, the free market had valued my intellect at a price they could never even dream of comprehending. I immediately picked up my phone and dialed the direct line of my mergers and acquisitions attorney, Leo. He answered on the second ring. "Tell me you saw the email," Morgan. Leo said, his voice crackling with professional excitement. "I have been refreshing my inbox since dawn." Apex came through. "I saw it," I replied, pacing across my living room. 15 million, Leo. I am looking at the term sheet right now, and I still cannot believe it is real. It is very real. And they want to move aggressively. Leo stated, the rapid clicking of a keyboard echoing in the background. They want to start the formal due diligence process by Tuesday. But Morgan, we need to lock down your intellectual property assignment immediately. Is there anyone, absolutely anyone, who could claim ownership or partial equity in your startup? The image of my father slamming the transfer papers onto the restaurant table flashed in my mind. Then came the image of Isaiah sitting there with his calculating, predatory stare. Isaiah managed millions in venture capital. He knew how the tech world operated. He knew how to exploit legal loopholes, leverage hostile takeovers, and bury founders in endless litigation. "Leo, we have a problem," I said, my tone turning deadly serious. I told him everything about the graduation dinner, the ambush, the aggressive demand to transfer my patents to Brittany, my father tearing up my diploma. When I finished, the line went dead silent for a long moment. "Listen to me very carefully, Morgan," Leo finally said, his voice dropping an octave. "If your brother-in-law is a venture capitalist, he is not stupid. He might not know the exact dollar amount, but he clearly smells blood in the water. If he suspects you are sitting on a multi-million-dollar asset, he will use his firm's legal resources to drown you in frivolous lawsuits just to freeze your assets and force a settlement. He will try to claim that because you are family, or because of some imaginary verbal agreement they have equity." I know, I said, gripping the phone tighter. "That is why they need to believe I am a total failure. They need to think the algorithm is worthless." "What do we do?" "We make you a ghost," Leo replied without hesitation. "We do not sign the Apex deal under your name or your current corporate entity. I am going to establish an anonymous blind trust in Delaware today. We will transfer the entirety of your intellectual property and patent rights into that trust immediately. When Apex Health buys the algorithm, they will be purchasing it from the blind trust, not from Morgan Reed. Your name will be completely scrubbed from public financial disclosures." "Will it hold up if Isaiah tries to dig into public records?" I asked. "Delaware. Corporate privacy laws are impenetrable," Leo assured me. "By the time the acquisition is finalized, the money will be safely locked in offshore accounts controlled only by you. But Morgan, you have to play your part perfectly. You cannot buy a new car. You cannot upgrade your apartment. You have to let them believe they won. You have to let them think you are broke and desperate until the ink is dry on the Apex contract." I looked at the torn pieces of my diploma that I had shoved into my purse the night before. I pulled them out and dropped them into the trash can. "Do not worry about my acting skills, Leo," I said, a cold, calculating resolve settling over my heart. I have spent my entire life pretending everything is fine while they walked all over me. Playing the broke, defeated daughter for a few more weeks will be the easiest performance of my life. Draft the blind trust documents. I am cutting the cord. Excellent, Leo said. I will send the preliminary non-disclosure agreements to Apex Health this afternoon. Get ready, Morgan. Your life is about to change forever. I ended the call and walked over to my large bay window looking out at the Seattle skyline. The rain had started to fall, washing the city streets clean. My family thought they could bully me into submission. They thought they could strip me of my achievements and force me to be a sacrificial lamb for Brittany's vanity. But they were playing checkers, and thanks to Apex Health, I was about to fund a masterclass in three-dimensional chess. I smiled, watching the traffic below. The game had just begun. 2 days after the disastrous graduation dinner, Isaiah Grant sat in his corner office overlooking the Puget Sound. As a senior partner at a top-tier venture capital firm, Isaiah had built his entire career on sniffing out money before anyone else even knew it existed. He was a sharp, impeccably dressed African-American man who navigated the cutthroat world of tech investments with absolute precision. He did not make mistakes, and he certainly did not let opportunities slip through his fingers. His private line rang loudly in the quiet office. The caller ID showed a number from Palo Alto. It was an old college buddy who now worked as a senior acquisitions analyst at a massive private equity fund in Silicon Valley. Isaiah picked up the phone expecting the usual industry gossip about failing startups and inflated valuations. Instead, the voice on the other end delivered a piece of information that made Isaiah sit up straight in his expensive leather chair. His contact spoke quickly, detailing a massive rumor circulating through the valley. Apex Health, the global medical conglomerate, was quietly preparing a major acquisition. They were about to drop 8 figures on a completely unknown artificial intelligence startup based in Seattle. The contact mentioned that the software was a predictive cellular analysis algorithm built by a solo female founder who had just finished her executive business degree. Isaiah felt his blood run cold. His mind raced back to the dinner at the seafood restaurant. He remembered Morgan sitting across from him, calmly refusing to hand over her code. He remembered Richard yelling, calling her a failure, tearing up her degree. He remembered his own arrogant words, telling Morgan she was out of her depth. Isaiah ended the call abruptly. He pulled up his browser and began digging through every single database his firm had access to. He cross-referenced medical artificial intelligence startups in Seattle with solo female founders. He pulled up the sparse digital footprint of NeuroPredict Analytics. The puzzle pieces slammed together with terrifying clarity. The algorithm they had tried to bully Morgan into giving away for free to save Britney's ridiculous cosmetic brand was not a useless tech project. It was a gold mine. It was the exact asset Apex Health was currently trying to acquire for a reported $15 million. Isaiah slammed his fist on the desk. Richard had almost blown it. His father-in-law's massive ego and terrible temper had alienated the only person in their family who actually held real wealth. If Morgan signed that deal with Apex Health without giving them a cut, the money would be gone forever. Isaiah grabbed his coat and rushed out of the office. He needed to stop Morgan before she locked them out permanently. 20 minutes later, Isaiah pulled his luxury SUV into the driveway of Richard and Patricia's sprawling suburban home. He walked through the front door without knocking. The atmosphere inside the house was toxic. Brittany was sitting on the living room sofa, sobbing loudly about her impending bankruptcy and complaining that Morgan was the worst sister in the world. Patricia was pacing the floor, cursing Morgan for her disobedience. Richard stood by the fireplace, pouring himself a drink and muttering about how he should have kicked Morgan out years ago. "Shut up," Isaiah said, his voice slicing through the room with absolute authority. "Everyone stop talking and listen to me right now." Richard turned around, offended by the sudden disrespect in his own home. "Excuse me, Isaiah. You do not come into my house and yell at me." "I said shut up, Richard," Isaiah snapped, stepping directly into the center of the room. "You have absolutely no idea what you did the other night. You threw a tantrum over a piece of paper and almost cost us $15 million. The entire room went dead silent. Brittany stopped crying mid-sob. Patricia froze in her tracks. Richard lowered his glass, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. "What are you talking about?" Patricia asked, her voice trembling slightly. "What $15 million?" Isaiah looked at the three of them, perfectly assessing their bottomless greed. "Morgan's algorithm is not a failed side project," he explained slowly, letting every word sink in. "I just got a call from one of my top contacts down in Silicon Valley. Apex Health is aggressively moving to acquire Morgan's startup. The initial offer on the table is $15 million, and she is currently negotiating the final terms. The code you demanded she give to Brittany for free is worth a fortune, and Morgan knows it." Patricia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Brittany's eyes widened to an impossible size, the tears instantly drying up as the reality of the money washed over her. Richard stared at Isaiah, his face draining of color. "15 million?" Richard repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "That ungrateful girl is sitting on $15 million, and she did not say a single word to us. She did not say anything, because you spent the entire dinner screaming at her," Isaiah fired back. "You backed her into a corner and forced her to cut us off. If she signs that contract with Apex Health on her own, we will never see a single penny of that money. Her lawyers will lock it up in trusts and offshore accounts before the ink is even dry. We cannot use threats anymore. Bullying her is not going to work. We have to completely change our strategy right now." "What do we do?" Brittany asked, her voice suddenly desperate and eager. "We cannot let her keep all of it. I need that money to save my brand. We are family. She owes us." Isaiah nodded, a cold, calculating smile spreading across his face. "Exactly. We are family, and that is exactly what we are going to use against her. Morgan has spent her entire life begging for your approval, Patricia. She has always wanted you and Richard to look at her the way you look at Brittany. We are going to give her exactly what she wants." Isaiah began pacing the room, laying out the new battle plan. "We drop the legal threats. We drop the anger. We go to her apartment tomorrow. We bring gifts. We cry. We apologize profusely. Patricia, you need to tell her that Richard was just stressed and out of his mind with worry over Brittany. You tell her that you love her, that you are so incredibly proud of her for getting her degree. We play the loving, remorseful family. We butter her up and lower her defenses." Richard looked unsure, his pride clearly wounded by the thought of apologizing to the daughter he despised. "I am not going to beg her," Richard muttered. "You will beg if you have to," Isaiah said, stepping right up to his father-in-law. "You will get down on your knees and cry if it gets us access to that intellectual property. Once she trusts us again, once she lets us back into her life, I will use my venture capital legal team to find a loophole in her company structure. We will lock her assets down before Apex can finalize the deal. But first, we have to make her believe we actually care about her." Patricia's eyes gleamed with a sudden dark understanding. She smoothed down her expensive blouse and nodded. "Isaiah is right, Richard. We have to be smart about this. We will buy her favorite pastries from that bakery down the street. We will show up looking completely heartbroken. Morgan is weak when it comes to family affection. She will fold the second I start crying." Isaiah smiled, feeling the thrill of the hunt taking over. The trap was set. They were going to weaponize Morgan's deepest emotional wounds to steal the biggest payout of their lives. They had no idea they were walking straight into a slaughterhouse. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of my downtown Seattle apartment, casting long geometric shadows across the hardwood floor. I sat on the edge of my bed, a steaming mug of black coffee in my hand, and stared at my phone resting on the nightstand. Part of me, the inner child that had spent 3 decades begging for crumbs of affection, anticipated a text, a missed call, a half-hearted apology from my mother claiming my father was just stressed about Brittany and her failing business. I picked up the device and unlocked the screen. Nothing. Not a single missed call. There was only one text message sent at 2 in the morning from my mother, Patricia. It read, "You humiliated us in front of the entire restaurant. We expect a formal apology and the signed transfer documents by Monday morning, or you can forget about coming to Thanksgiving this year." I read the words twice, feeling a strange, profound sense of peace wash over me. There was no sadness left. The threat of being excluded from a holiday dinner, a dinner where I was usually relegated to the corner seat and ignored while everyone praised Brittany, felt like a gift rather than a punishment. I tapped the screen, blocked my mother's number, and then proceeded to block my father, my sister, and my arrogant brother-in-law, Isaiah. The digital cord was officially cut. I was free. The heavy downpour of the Seattle morning soon battered against my apartment windows, creating a steady, rhythmic drumming sound that perfectly matched the rapid typing of my fingers. I was deep into a secure virtual meeting with Leo, finalizing the complex blind trust structures, when the sharp, unexpected chime of my front door buzzer echoed through the quiet living room. I paused my typing. Nobody knew this address except a few trusted colleagues, and I certainly was not expecting any deliveries. I walked over to the security intercom monitor mounted on the wall and stared at the high-definition video feed. Standing outside my door looking thoroughly drenched and holding a pristine pink pastry box from the expensive French bakery down the street were my parents. Patricia was adjusting her designer raincoat, her face arranged in a practiced expression of deep maternal sorrow. Richard stood rigidly beside her, shifting his weight from foot to foot, clearly uncomfortable but forcing a tight, agreeable smile. My heart gave a single hard thump before settling into a cold, steady rhythm. Isaiah had done it. He had sniffed out the Apex Health acquisition and sent them here to play the ultimate game of emotional manipulation. They were here to reel me back in. I walked back to my desk, picked up my smartphone, opened the voice memo application, and pressed the bright red record button. I slipped the phone into the front pocket of my cardigan, ensuring the microphone was perfectly unobstructed. Then I took a deep breath, arranged my features into a mask of weary vulnerability, and opened the front door. Morgan, my sweet girl. Patricia gasped the moment the door swung open. She stepped forward and threw her arms around my shoulders, burying her face in my neck. Her perfume was overpowering, a heavy floral scent that completely masked the smell of the rain. She squeezed me tightly, and I could actually feel her forcing her shoulders to shake as if she were crying. It was an Oscar-worthy performance. If I had not spent the last decade analyzing data patterns and recognizing behavioral anomalies, I might have actually believed her. "We are so incredibly sorry," Morgan Richard added, his voice dripping with manufactured remorse. He stepped into my apartment holding out the pink bakery box like a peace offering. I was completely out of line the other night at the restaurant. The stress of Brittany and her failing business simply broke me. I took my frustrations out on the wrong daughter. "You have to forgive an old man for losing his temper. We brought you your favorite strawberry tarts." I gently pulled away from my mother's embrace, keeping my eyes wide and my posture defensive. I stepped aside, allowing them to fully enter my living room. They walked in, their eyes immediately darting around my modest space, silently calculating the value of everything they saw. Patricia wiped away a non-existent tear from her perfectly powdered cheek and reached out to touch my arm. "We love you so much," she whispered, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "We are so proud of you for getting your master's degree. We never should have pressured you to give your hard-earned work to your sister. Isaiah made us realize how blind we have been. We just want our family back together. We want to support you and your startup properly. Let us help you grow your business, Morgan. We can be a team." I guided them toward the kitchen island, offering them a seat on the bar stools. I took the pink bakery box from my father and set it down next to my empty ceramic coffee mug. I looked at both of them, absorbing the sheer audacity of their sudden change in demeanor. They were looking at me with wide, expectant eyes, waiting for me to break down, cry, and welcome them back into my life with open arms. They wanted me to hand over the keys to the kingdom. I looked down at the marble countertop, pretending to be deeply conflicted. I let out a long, shaky sigh, playing the part of the broken daughter, seeking validation. Mom, Dad, I appreciate you coming here, I said, keeping my voice soft and hesitant. The dinner really hurt me. It made me realize that my startup was doing nothing but tearing this family apart. You were right about me being out of my depth in the business world. The pressure was just too much for me to handle alone. Patricia leaned forward eagerly, her eyes lighting up with poorly concealed greed. Oh, sweetheart, you are not alone anymore. We are here to guide you. We can handle the corporate side of things for you. I shook my head slowly, offering them a sad, defeated smile. You are too late, I said softly. What do you mean too late? Richard asked, his polite smile faltering slightly. After the dinner, I realized I needed to cut my losses and move on. I explained, forcing my voice to sound completely exhausted. The algorithm was ruining everything. So I reached out to a small local tech firm early this morning. I sold the entire patent and all the intellectual property rights outright. The transfer is completely finalized. The silence that fell over my kitchen was absolute. It was a thick, suffocating vacuum of sound. Patricia stopped breathing. Richard froze, his hands gripping the edge of the marble island so tightly his knuckles turned stark white. You sold it, Patricia whispered, her voice entirely stripped of its warm maternal affection. Her tone was suddenly sharp and metallic. Yes, I replied, maintaining my facade of innocent relief. I sold it for $50,000. It is enough to pay off my student loans and completely clear my credit card debt. I am finally free from the financial burden. I thought you would be happy for me. The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. The mask of the loving, remorseful parents did not just slip, it shattered into a million jagged pieces. Patricia's face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. Her eyes widened, blazing with a fury so intense it made her look almost demonic. $50,000, Richard roared, the sound exploding from his chest like a detonation. He lunged forward, his face turning a dangerous mottled purple. He grabbed my heavy ceramic coffee mug off the kitchen counter and hurled it straight down onto the hardwood floor. The mug shattered instantly, sending sharp shards of ceramic and dark coffee exploding across the room, splashing against my cabinets and my shoes. You stupid, worthless idiot, Richard screamed, spit flying from his lips as he slammed his fists down onto the marble island. You absolute moron. $50,000. Isaiah told us Apex Health was offering you $15 million. $15 million, Morgan. You gave away our fortune for pennies. You threw away $15 million of our family's money just to pay off your pathetic student loans. Patricia lunged toward me, her manicured fingers curling into claws, though she stopped just short of crossing the kitchen island. You ruined us! She shrieked, her voice echoing violently off the walls. That money was going to save Brittany. That money belonged to this family. Isaiah had a plan to secure it, and you threw it in the garbage because you are too stupid to know what you possess. You selfish, vindictive little failure. I stood perfectly still amidst the screaming and the shattered ceramic on my floor. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I just looked at them, watching them expose the ugliest, most venal parts of their souls over a sum of money they believed they were entitled to. The contrast between the crying, apologetic parents from 2 minutes ago and the raging, greedy monsters standing before me now was a masterpiece of human depravity. My hand casually slipped into my cardigan pocket, my fingers brushing against the smooth surface of my smartphone. The recording was capturing every single second of their violent, extortionate meltdown. They had just freely admitted on tape that they knew about the Apex Health acquisition, that Isaiah was orchestrating a plan to steal it, and that their apology was nothing but a calculated financial trap. I looked at my father's purple face and my mother's hateful eyes. I smiled, a genuine, terrifying smile that made both of them suddenly stop screaming. I had everything I needed. I pointed to the door. Get out of my apartment before I call building security and have you both escorted out in handcuffs. My father stood with his chest heaving, his fists clenched tight enough to draw blood. He looked like he wanted to break more than just a coffee mug, but the cold and dead expression on my face finally made him hesitate. He grabbed my mother by the arm, dragging her toward the hallway. Patricia was still spitting venom, screaming about how I was a traitor and how I would rot in hell for keeping that money from my sister. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind them, shaking the walls of my living room. I immediately took my phone out of my cardigan pocket, stopped the recording, and uploaded the audio file directly to 3 separate encrypted cloud servers. I swept the broken ceramic into a dustpan, my hands completely steady. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a razor-sharp focus. 30 minutes later, my phone vibrated on the kitchen island. The caller ID displayed a generic corporate number from the financial district. I had blocked Isaiah earlier, but a senior partner at a venture capital firm always had alternate lines. I tapped the screen and lifted the phone to my ear, hitting the record button on my secondary device. "Morgan," Isaiah said. His voice was not laced with the frantic and unhinged rage my parents had just displayed. It was perfectly smooth, deeply resonant, and entirely stripped of emotion. It was the voice of an apex predator who negotiated 9-figure acquisitions before his morning coffee. "I know you did not sell the algorithm for $50,000. Isaiah continued, the faint hum of city traffic echoing through his end of the line. "Your parents might be foolish enough to buy that pathetic lie, but I am not. You are stalling. You are trying to buy time to finalize the paperwork with Apex Health before we can secure our equity. It was a clever distraction, Morgan. I will give you credit for that. But playtime is officially over." I leaned against the marble counter, letting him speak. I needed him to put his threats on the record. "What do you want, Isaiah?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly flat. "I want you to understand the reality of your situation," he replied, his tone conversational and almost friendly, which made it infinitely more terrifying. "You think you hold all the cards because you wrote the code. You think because you have a fancy new executive business degree you can navigate a corporate buyout on your own. But you are swimming with sharks now. I do this for a living. I break companies apart, strip their assets, and rebuild them for profit every single day. You cannot escape me, Morgan." He paused, letting the silence hang in the air for a brief second to maximize the psychological weight of his words. "I am looking at a draft of a civil lawsuit my legal team just prepared," Isaiah stated. "We are filing an emergency injunction in state court tomorrow morning. The claim is very simple. We are asserting that your algorithm was developed using familial resources, specifically hardware and financial support provided by your father, which gives your family a legitimate claim to a percentage of the intellectual property." "That is a complete fabrication," I said, my voice devoid of panic. "You know I built every line of that code independently. It does not matter if it is a fabrication." Isaiah chuckled softly. "That is the beauty of the American legal system, Morgan. It is not about what is true, it is about what I can tie up in court. The moment my lawyers file that injunction, your intellectual property becomes legally encumbered. The patent rights will be frozen. Do you know what happens when a publicly traded titan like Apex Health sees an encumbered asset during their due diligence process?" I remained silent, knowing exactly what he was going to say. "They run away," Isaiah answered for me. "They terminate the acquisition immediately. Apex Health is not going to spend $15 million and risk absorbing a messy and highly publicized family lawsuit. They will drop you, Morgan. They will cancel the contract, issue a press release stating they are pursuing other technological avenues, and you will be left with absolutely nothing. Your algorithm will be stuck in legal purgatory for the next 5 years while my firm drains you with endless litigation fees. You will go bankrupt before you even see the inside of a courtroom." The sheer malice in his strategy was breathtaking. He was not just threatening to take a piece of the pie, he was threatening to burn the entire bakery to the ground if I did not let him steal from me. He was weaponizing his vast financial resources to crush a solo female founder, a tactic he had probably used on countless other startups. "So here is the deal," Isaiah concluded, his voice dropping into a hard and uncompromising command. "You are going to sign a legally binding transfer, granting 50% of the patent rights and 50% of the Apex payout directly to Brittany. In exchange, my legal team will back off, and we will allow your little sale to proceed smoothly. You get to keep half the money, which is far more than a failure like you deserves anyway. Brittany saves her company. I secure my wife's financial future, and everyone walks away happy. Give her 50% or you lose everything. You have until 8 o'clock tomorrow morning to send the signed agreement to my office. I listened to the steady breathing of the man who thought he had just checkmated me. He believed his sophisticated corporate threats would paralyze me with fear. He thought I was just a naive programmer who would hand over millions of dollars to avoid a legal battle. I pressed my phone closer to my ear. "Are you finished, Isaiah?" I asked. "I am," he replied confidently. "Make the smart choice, Morgan." "You are right about one thing," I said, my voice dropping to a glacial whisper. "I am swimming with sharks. But you made a fatal miscalculation, Isaiah. You assumed I was the prey." I ended the call. I did not wait for his response. I did not argue. I simply hung up the phone, severing the connection with a satisfying click. I immediately dialed my attorney. Leo answered instantly, clearly expecting my call. "They took the bait, Leo," I said, walking over to my desk and opening my laptop. My parents confessed on tape, and Isaiah just called to explicitly threaten me with a fraudulent injunction to extort 50% of the Apex deal. I have the entire conversation recorded. He outlined his intent to file a bad faith lawsuit just to sabotage the acquisition. Leo let out a sharp whistle of approval. He just handed us the rope to hang him with Morgan. Extortion, tortious interference with prospective economic advantage, and bad faith litigation. If he files that injunction, he is committing career suicide. But we cannot wait for him to strike first. We need to accelerate the blind trust transfer tonight. "Do it!" I commanded, my fingers flying across my keyboard as I transferred the new audio files to our shared secure drive. Transfer every single line of code, every patent right, and every proprietary asset into the anonymous Delaware Trust. Lock it all down before the courts even open tomorrow. "Consider it done," Leo said. "By the time the sun rises, Morgan Reed will officially own absolutely nothing, and your family will be chasing a ghost." I closed my laptop, the screen going dark. The war had officially begun, and I was ready to destroy them all. The sharp knock on my apartment door came precisely at 8 in the morning. I was already dressed in a tailored blazer and slacks, sitting at my kitchen island with my laptop open. I walked to the door, checking the security monitor. A man in a beige windbreaker stood in the hallway holding a thick manila envelope. I knew exactly what it was before I even turned the deadbolt. Isaiah was a man of his word when it came to deploying his wealth to crush his enemies. "Are you Morgan Reed?" the man asked, his expression completely bored. "I am," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "You have been served," he said, thrusting the heavy envelope into my hands, before turning around and walking toward the elevator. I closed the door, locked it, and carried the package over to my marble counter. I sliced open the top and pulled out a massive stack of legal documents. The seal of the King County Superior Court was stamped across the first page. I scanned the bold, capitalized text. It was an official petition for a temporary restraining order and a preliminary injunction. The plaintiffs listed were Richard Reed, Patricia Reed, and Brittany Grant. They were being represented by a highly aggressive, notoriously expensive corporate litigation firm that Isaiah frequently used for his venture capital disputes. I immediately dialed my attorney. Leo answered on the first ring. "They filed it, Leo," I said, staring at the injunction papers. "I am holding the temporary restraining order in my hands right now. I just received the electronic notification from the court clerk." Leo replied, his tone laced with a mixture of professional outrage and disbelief. "Morgan, I have seen a lot of frivolous lawsuits in my career, but the legal argument Isaiah and your family put together is absolutely unhinged. Have you read their core claim yet?" I flipped to the third page of the filing, my eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. When I reached the primary argument, a harsh, humorless laugh escaped my lips. "This has to be a joke," I said, gripping the paper. "They are claiming my artificial intelligence algorithm is family property because of a laptop. It is a masterclass in bad faith litigation." Leo sighed heavily. Isaiah's lawyers crafted a completely fabricated narrative. They are arguing that 10 years ago on your 23rd birthday, your father purchased a consumer-grade laptop for you. They are officially classifying that $600 piece of plastic as seed capital and familial infrastructure. Because they allege the absolute earliest genesis of your coding took place on hardware funded by the Reed family, they are claiming your entire startup is a joint family venture. And as a member of this supposed family venture, Brittany is legally entitled to 50% of all intellectual property and future acquisitions. I stared at the document feeling a potent mix of absolute disgust and sheer amazement at their audacity. The laptop my father had bought me a decade ago was a cheap entry-level machine. I remembered that birthday vividly. Richard had complained for an hour about the price tag, calling me a financial burden while handing over the receipt. That computer could barely run basic word processing programs, let alone compile complex data structures. Leo, this is technologically absurd, I said, my voice rising with righteous indignation. My predictive medical algorithm relies on deep machine learning models. You cannot train a neural network on a 10-year-old commercial laptop. It would literally melt the motherboard. The entire architecture of my code was built exclusively on Amazon Web Services cloud servers, which I paid for entirely out of my own pocket, using my salary as a data scientist. I have years of credit card statements to prove it. I know that, and you know that, Leo explained patiently. But a superior court judge pushing 65 years old does not understand cloud computing infrastructure or machine learning. All the judge sees is a wealthy venture capitalist backing a family dispute over a contested business asset. Isaiah deliberately filed an emergency motion claiming you were actively attempting to liquidate disputed family assets. Judges almost always grant a temporary freeze in these situations just to maintain the status quo until a formal evidentiary hearing can take place. I flipped to the final page, my stomach tightening. The judge's signature was there in bold black ink. The injunction was fully active. What does this mean for the acquisition? I asked, dreading the answer. Before Leo could respond, a secondary incoming call beeped on my phone. The caller ID flashed the corporate number for Apex Health. The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. Isaiah had undoubtedly made sure the corporate attorneys at Apex received a copy of the injunction the very second the judge signed it. Apex is calling me right now, I told Leo. Answer it, Leo commanded. Do not sound panicked. Sound annoyed. Tell them we are handling a frivolous nuisance suit and that it will be resolved shortly. I switched over to the incoming call, taking a slow, deep breath to steady my heart rate. This is Morgan Reed, I answered smoothly. Morgan, this is David, the lead acquisitions counsel for Apex Health. The voice on the other end was stripped of the warm, congratulatory tone they had used yesterday. It was strictly business cold and risk-averse. We just received an emergency injunction filing from a Seattle court regarding NeuroPredict Analytics. The document names multiple family members claiming 50% equity in your algorithm. It is a completely baseless extortion attempt by my estranged family, David, I replied, projecting absolute confidence. My brother-in-law works in venture capital and is attempting to use a frivolous legal loophole regarding a 10-year-old birthday gift to hijack this deal. I am the sole author and owner of the code. My legal team is already filing a motion to dismiss. I appreciate the context, Morgan, David said, but you know how corporate compliance works. Apex Health cannot acquire encumbered intellectual property. If we buy your algorithm while it is under a legal freeze, we absorb the lawsuit. We do not do family drama. Our board of directors has ordered an immediate halt on the $15 million acquisition. My grip on the phone tightened. How much time do I have to clear this up? I asked. 72 hours, David stated firmly. If you cannot get that injunction fully lifted and provide a clean, uncontested chain of title by Thursday morning, Apex Health will permanently withdraw the offer. We will walk away, Morgan. Get it sorted. The line clicked dead. I lowered the phone, staring blankly at the wall of my apartment. Isaiah knew exactly what he was doing. He did not need to win the lawsuit to destroy me. He only needed to delay the process long enough for Apex to get spooked and pull their $15 million off the table. He was betting that the sheer terror of losing a life-changing fortune would force me to surrender. He expected me to call him crying, begging to sign over half my life's work to Brittany, just to salvage the remainder of the deal. I called Leo back, my jaw set, my eyes narrowing with a cold, unforgiving determination. Apex gave us 72 hours or they walk, I told my lawyer. Leo swore loudly under his breath. That is a brutal timeline, Morgan. Isaiah has us pinned. We have to rush a hearing, but court dockets are packed. No, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. We are not going to play defense anymore. Isaiah wants a war of attrition. He wants to drain my resources and run out the clock. But he does not realize that I have every single receipt, every single line of code history, and every single digital footprint mapping back a decade. We are not just going to lift this injunction, Leo. We are going to build a legal trap so devastating it will rip his entire venture capital career to shreds. Tell me what you need, Leo said, matching my newfound aggression. I need you to prepare a massive countersuit for tortious interference, I commanded. And I am going to tear my apartment apart to find the financial records from 10 years ago. They want to talk about family property. I am going to show the judge exactly what kind of family they really are. I spent the next 6 hours tearing my apartment apart. I dragged heavy plastic storage bins out from the back of my closet, dumping old tax returns, bank statements, and college receipts onto the living room floor. I needed paper trails. I needed the physical proof of every single server hosting fee I paid while waitressing during my early 20s. My hands were covered in dust, but my mind was operating with crystalline precision. Just as I found the crucial folder containing my original Amazon Web Services billing history, my phone began to vibrate on the kitchen counter. It was not a steady, rhythmic ring. It was a continuous, violent buzzing, the sound of a device receiving dozens of push notifications in rapid succession. I wiped my hands on my jeans and walked over to the screen. My lock screen was an absolute waterfall of alerts from professional networking sites and various local news aggregator applications. I tapped on the first news alert, my heart sinking as the page loaded. The headline on Seattle Tech Insider, a widely read industry blog, was written in bold, sensationalist font. It read, "Local AI founder defrauds family to secure $15 million buyout." I clicked the link, my eyes scanning the article with mounting horror. The piece was incredibly detailed, far too detailed for a random journalist to have written overnight. It cited anonymous sources close to the family, claiming that Morgan Reed, had secretly negotiated a massive corporate acquisition using proprietary technology funded entirely by my elderly parents. The article painted a devastating picture. It described my father as a generous, hardworking man who had sacrificed his own retirement to buy the computer equipment necessary to launch my career. It framed me as a ruthless, greedy sociopath who was now cutting her loving family out of their rightful equity, just days before closing the biggest deal of the year. Isaiah had not just leaked the injunction to Apex Health. He had used his vast venture capital media connections to orchestrate a highly coordinated, perfectly timed smear campaign. He was weaponizing public opinion, hoping the sheer weight of public humiliation would break my spirit. Before I could even process the full scope of the article, my phone vibrated again. A search engine alert I had set up for my startup's name flashed across the screen. This time, it was a link to a social media video. I opened the application. There was my sister Brittany broadcasting live to her hundreds of thousands of lifestyle followers. She was sitting on the plush velvet sofa in our parents' suburban living room. She wore no makeup. Her hair was deliberately messy, and her eyes were red and swollen. It was a masterful, calculated performance of absolute victimhood. "I never thought I would have to make a video like this," Brittany said to the camera, her voice trembling perfectly. She wiped a tear from her cheek, staring directly into the lens. "My sister Morgan is about to close a massive tech deal, and instead of helping the family who supported her, who housed her, and who paid for her equipment, she is legally trying to bankrupt our parents." Brittany paused, letting out a soft, dramatic sob. My beauty brand is struggling and Morgan promised to help me. But the second she saw a bigger paycheck, she turned her back on all of us. She served my parents with legal threats. She is trying to throw us out on the street just so she can keep all the millions for herself. I am just so heartbroken. How can someone be so cruel to their own flesh and blood? The video had already amassed 500,000 views in less than 2 hours. Below the video, the comment section was an absolute bloodbath of internet outrage. Thousands of strangers, people who knew absolutely nothing about the years of emotional abuse I had endured, were tearing me to pieces. They called me a monster. They called me a greedy corporate snake. One comment with thousands of likes demanded that Apex Health drop the acquisition immediately. Another tagged my personal business accounts, calling for a total boycott of NeuroPredict Analytics. My inbox was flooding with hateful emails from Britney's fanatic followers, some of them containing explicit death threats. The sheer scale of the character assassination was suffocating. Isaiah knew that venture capital firms and massive conglomerates like Apex hated public relations nightmares. By turning me into a viral villain, he was actively trying to force Apex to run away, ensuring that his 72-hour deadline would be my absolute execution. My hands shook as I scrolled through the endless stream of venomous messages. The scared, isolated girl inside me screamed to post a response. I wanted to turn on my camera and scream the truth. I wanted to tell the world about the damp basement, the exorbitant rent my parents charged me, and the fact that Richard had torn my diploma to shreds in a crowded restaurant. I wanted to post the audio recording of Isaiah blatantly extorting me. I actually typed out a furious defense on my keyboard, my fingers hitting the keys with enough force to crack them. But right before I hit the publish button, I stopped. I stared at the blinking cursor. If I posted the truth now, it would just turn into a chaotic internet brawl. Isaiah would use his expensive legal team to spin my defense as unhinged rambling. I would be playing his game on his turf, fighting in the mud, while he sat safely in his glass office. I deleted the drafted post. I closed the social media applications. I picked up my phone and dialed my lawyer. Leo answered immediately, the sound of furious typing echoing in the background. "Tell me you are not reading the Seattle Tech Insider piece," Leo said, his voice tight with anger. "I read it." I replied, my voice stripped of all emotion, cold and hollow. "I saw Britney's video too. My inbox is currently a digital mob demanding my head on a spike. Isaiah is trying to burn my reputation to the ground so Apex Health drops me before Thursday." "Do not post anything," Morgan, Leo ordered sharply. "Do not defend yourself online. Do not comment. Do not engage with the trolls. We are downloading every single article, every video, and every comment. Isaiah just handed us the holy grail of defamation and tortious interference evidence. He is trying to manipulate a corporate buyout through public slander. The damages we are going to claim in the countersuit just multiplied by a factor of 10. I am not going to say a single word, Leo, I promised, looking down at the stack of 10-year-old server receipts scattered across my living room floor. Let them paint me as the villain. Let Britney cry for the cameras. Let Isaiah think his little media blitz is working. When we walk into that boardroom, I am not just going to clear my name. I am going to make sure the financial fallout destroys them so completely they will never be able to afford a network connection to post a video ever again. I ended the call and tossed my phone onto the sofa, ignoring the continuous buzzing of new hate mail. I knelt back down on the hardwood floor, picked up my highlighter, and went back to work. The internet could scream all it wanted. I was building a guillotine, and I needed the measurements to be absolutely perfect. The digital mob howled outside my virtual windows all night, but inside my apartment, there was only the sound of rustling paper and the hum of my laptop cooling fan. I had muted every notification. My phone sat face down on the kitchen island, vibrating violently against the marble every few seconds, as Britney's followers continued their coordinated assault. I refused to look at it. I refused to give them the satisfaction of a panicked response or a tearful public apology. Instead, I poured my third cup of black coffee and leaned closer to my monitor. On the screen, Leo looked just as exhausted as I was. It was 3 in the morning. His tie was loosened, his sleeves rolled up, and his desk was covered in empty energy drink cans. We had been on a secure video call for 9 straight hours, meticulously dismantling Isaiah's fraudulent injunction piece by piece. They are basing their entire claim on a singular piece of hardware, Leo said, rubbing his tired eyes and staring at his legal notepad. The injunction specifically cites the purchase of a commercial laptop by Richard Reed 10 years ago. They argue that because the initial coding environment was provided by familial funds, the resulting intellectual property is a joint venture. We need to kill the hardware argument before we even touch the software side. I shifted my weight on the floor, surrounded by 10 years of meticulously archived tax documents, bank statements, and faded retail receipts. My parents always mocked my obsessive record-keeping. They called me paranoid for digitizing and filing every single financial transaction I ever made. Tonight, that paranoia was going to save my $15 million deal. I found it. I said, my voice hoarse but triumphant. I pulled a faded, crinkled receipt from a plastic sleeve and held it up to the webcam. Then I cross-referenced it with a printed bank statement from my old college checking account. Leo leaned closer to his camera. Read it to me, Morgan. It is a receipt from an electronics retailer dated exactly 2 weeks after my 23rd birthday. I read aloud, tracing the faded ink with my index finger. My father bought me a base model bottom-of-the-line laptop. It had a cheap processor and barely enough memory to run a web browser. It was a glorified typewriter. You cannot build a deep machine learning neural network on a typewriter, Leo. I tried, and the machine crashed within 2 days. I set the receipt down and picked up the bank statement. So I took my tips from working double shifts at the diner. I went to the store and I bought a high-performance motherboard, 2 terabytes of solid-state storage, and 32 gigabytes of premium random access memory. I gutted the cheap plastic shell my father bought me, and I rebuilt the entire machine from the ground up. I held the bank statement up to the lens. The total was $1,200. Paid entirely from my personal checking account. The only thing my father provided was the plastic outer casing and the keyboard. The actual computing power, the engine that processed the data, was completely funded by me. Leo let out a sharp, genuine laugh. That is perfect. In intellectual property law, the physical vessel is irrelevant if the creator independently financed the functional infrastructure. We just completely severed their hardware claim. But Isaiah has expensive lawyers, Morgan. They will pivot. They will argue that even if you upgraded the parts, the initial lines of code were still stored on a machine that originated as a family gift. That is where they are completely ignorant about modern data science, I replied, a slow, predatory smile forming on my face. I stood up, walked over to my desk, and shared my screen with Leo. I opened my Amazon Web Services administrative dashboard. I navigated to the billing history and filtered the data back to the very first day I registered the domain for NeuroPredict Analytics. My algorithm was never stored locally, I explained, watching Leo's eyes widen as he read the data on the shared screen. I knew my hardware was vulnerable. I knew the physical laptop could crash or get stolen. So from day one of the code, I utilized cloud computing. I rented secure remote servers. Every single algorithmic iteration, every dataset, and every predictive model was processed and stored on a remote server farm in Virginia. I clicked on the Payment Profiles tab. I have paid the monthly server hosting fees for 3 consecutive years. Using a business credit card registered exclusively in my name, I stated, highlighting the continuous stream of payments. My father's laptop was nothing more than a dumb terminal. It was just a screen I used to access the cloud. The actual property, the proprietary asset that Apex Health is buying, has never once resided on family-funded hardware. Leo clapped his hands together, the sharp sound echoing through the video call. Morgan, you just dismantled their entire case. Isaiah's legal team filed an emergency injunction based on a fundamental misunderstanding of your technological infrastructure. They assumed you were building a $15 million company on a cheap consumer laptop in a basement. They assumed I was stupid. I corrected him, my voice dropping to a hardened, metallic tone. They assumed I was the same helpless, compliant girl who used to let them take credit for my achievements. They thought a smear campaign would force me to surrender without checking my own receipts. I will draft the motion to vacate the injunction right now, Leo said, his exhaustion completely replaced by legal adrenaline. I will attach the hardware receipts, your bank statements, and the certified cloud hosting billing logs as primary exhibits. When the judge sees this paper trail, Isaiah's argument of a joint family venture will instantly collapse. We will file it the second the courthouse opens. Do it, I commanded. And Leo, make sure you send a courtesy copy of the motion directly to Isaiah's personal email address. I want him to wake up, read the exhibits, and realize his entire extortion strategy just went up in flames. I closed the video call and sat back in my chair. Outside my window, the Seattle skyline was beginning to glow with the pale light of dawn. My phone was still buzzing on the counter, choked with notifications from strangers who thought they knew the truth about me. I did not care anymore. The digital noise meant absolutely nothing. I had spent the darkest hours of the night building a fortress of undeniable empirical facts. My parents and my sister could cry to the media. Isaiah could flex his venture capital muscle, but they could not argue with credit card receipts and cloud server logs. I had drawn a steel boundary around my life's work, and anyone who tried to cross it was going to get cut to pieces. The adrenaline from discovering the Amazon Web Services logs had barely begun to fade when my secure business line rang. It was 9 in the morning. I had just stepped out of the shower, my hair still damp, buttoning up a crisp white silk shirt. I walked over to my desk and glanced at the caller identification. It was David, the lead acquisitions counsel for Apex Health. He was not calling to check on the status of my legal defense. He was calling with an execution squad. I answered the phone. "Good morning, David," I said, keeping my voice bright and professional. "My lawyer and I have already compiled the definitive proof to vacate the injunction. The hardware claim my family made is entirely baseless." David did not offer a polite greeting. He did not acknowledge my hard work. "Morgan, check your email right now," he commanded, his voice tight and completely devoid of warmth. "I just sent you an encrypted link for an emergency virtual meeting with the Apex Health Executive Board. They are waiting for you. Do not be late." The line went dead. The sudden terrifying chill of corporate panic washed over me. You do not get summoned to an emergency board meeting to be congratulated. You get summoned to be fired. I sat down at my desk, my fingers trembling slightly as I opened my inbox and clicked the secure link. The screen loaded, revealing a sprawling, glass-walled boardroom overlooking the Chicago skyline. Seated around the massive mahogany table were 6 of the most powerful healthcare executives in the country. At the head of the table sat Catherine, the chief executive officer of Apex Health. She was a formidable, sharp-featured woman who had built her career by ruthlessly eliminating corporate liabilities. Right now, she was looking directly at the camera, and I was the liability. "Good morning, Morgan," Catherine said, her tone as hard and unforgiving as polished granite. "We are not going to waste time with pleasantries. Yesterday, our legal department was served with a temporary restraining order freezing your intellectual property. This morning, our public relations department woke up to a catastrophic media crisis." Catherine pressed a button on a remote control, and the shared screen on my monitor split in two. On one side, I saw the faces of the board members. On the other side, a video began to play. It was Brittany. My sister was sitting on our parents' sofa, tears streaming down her perfectly contoured face, telling hundreds of thousands of viewers that I was bankrupting our elderly parents and stealing the family fortune. The video had completely exploded overnight. It was trending across every major social media platform. Below the video, Catherine pulled up the Seattle Tech Insider article that Isaiah had funded, highlighting the vicious, defamatory headlines accusing me of corporate fraud. I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting into painful knots. "Catherine, I can explain." I started leaning forward toward my microphone. "That video is a highly coordinated smear campaign orchestrated by my brother-in-law. He is a venture capitalist attempting to extort 50% of this acquisition by weaponizing my family against me." My attorney and I have spent the entire night gathering the financial receipts and cloud server logs. I can prove to you right now that my algorithm was built entirely independently. They have absolutely zero legal claim to my code. Catherine held up her hand, instantly silencing me. Morgan, we do not care about your server logs, she stated flatly. We are not a courtroom. We are a publicly traded multinational healthcare conglomerate. Our stock price is dictated by public perception and risk management. Right now, the public perceives you as a ruthless, deceitful founder who is destroying her own family for a payout. More importantly, from a legal standpoint, your asset is entirely encumbered. You are asking us to purchase a $15 million lawsuit. Apex Health does not buy lawsuits. We buy clean, uncontested technology. David leaned into the camera frame. The board has convened this morning to vote on the immediate termination of your acquisition contract, he explained, his eyes totally devoid of sympathy. The legal risk combined with the public relations disaster is simply too high. We cannot introduce your algorithm into our hospital networks if there is even a fractional chance that a judge might award equity to a venture capital firm backing your sister. My breath caught in my throat. I felt the walls of my apartment closing in on me. I had survived the emotional abuse of my parents. I had survived the humiliation at the restaurant. I had built an impenetrable defense against their fraudulent legal claims. But I was losing the war of perception. Isaiah had outplayed me. He knew he could never win the actual lawsuit, so he bypassed the law and attacked my corporate viability. He was poisoning the well so Apex would refuse to drink. Please, I said, forcing my voice to remain steady, refusing to let them see me panic. Do not walk away from a revolutionary medical technology because of a fabricated internet scandal. You know the predictive capabilities of my algorithm. You know it will save thousands of lives and save your hospital networks millions of dollars in diagnostic inefficiencies. I just need time to get this injunction thrown out of court. Catherine looked at me, her expression unreadable. She glanced at the other board members, a silent communication passing between the corporate titans. Finally, she turned her sharp gaze back to the camera. We recognize the value of your code, Morgan. Catherine said, her voice lowering into a final absolute declaration. That is the only reason we are giving you this ultimatum instead of immediately terminating the deal. You have exactly 48 hours. I blinked, the words echoing in my mind. 48 hours. If that temporary restraining order is not completely vacated by a judge, and if your chain of title is not perfectly clean by 9 a.m. on Thursday, we are done. Catherine continued. We will permanently withdraw the $15 million offer. We will issue a press release stating that due to unforeseen legal complications on the part of the founder, Apex Health has terminated all negotiations with NeuroPredict Analytics. You have 2 days, Morgan. Fix your family problem or you lose everything. The screen went black. They terminated the connection without saying goodbye. I sat alone in my silent apartment staring at my reflection in the dark monitor. 48 hours. It was a death sentence. The American legal system moved at a glacial pace. Getting an emergency hearing scheduled, presenting the evidence, and securing a formal dismissal order from a judge within 2 days was virtually impossible. Courts were backlogged for weeks. Isaiah knew this. He had orchestrated the perfect corporate assassination. He filed the injunction, knowing I had the evidence to beat it, but also knowing I would never have the time to present that evidence before Apex pulled the plug. He had backed me against the edge of a cliff, and the clock was ticking down to my absolute ruin. I grabbed my phone and dialed my lawyer. Leo. I said, my voice trembling with a terrifying mixture of rage and desperation. Apex just gave me 48 hours to lift the injunction, or they kill the deal, forever. Leo swore violently on the other end of the line. Morgan, that is a suicide mission. We cannot force a judge to hear a motion to dismiss in 2 days. The procedural timeline simply does not allow it. Then we bypass the judge, I commanded, standing up and grabbing my coat. Isaiah wants to play dirty. He wants to use extortion to steal my life's work. It is time to stop playing defense. I am going to end this today. I hung up the phone. I was out of time, out of options, and completely out of patience. They wanted a war. I was going to give them a massacre. The clock on my wall displayed 2 in the morning. I was pacing the length of my apartment running entirely on black coffee and absolute rage. 48 hours. That was all the time I had to salvage a $15 million deal. Leo was working frantically on drafting a high-level extortion complaint against Isaiah, but we both knew the legal system would not move fast enough to beat the corporate deadline Apex Health had set. I needed a miracle, or I needed my family to make a catastrophic, unrecoverable mistake. My phone suddenly vibrated against the marble countertop, shattering the heavy silence of my apartment. It was not a text message from Leo. It was a high-priority push notification from the dedicated security application linked to my private office suite in downtown Seattle. I grabbed the device and unlocked the screen. A bright red banner flashed across the top. Motion detected in Sector 4. Main entrance compromised. I tapped the alert, bringing up the live high-definition security feed. My physical office space for NeuroPredict Analytics was modest, consisting of a small reception area, a server closet, and a main workspace enclosed entirely in frosted glass. I had installed military-grade cameras 3 months ago to protect client medical data files. Right now, those cameras were broadcasting a scene so entirely absurd, I actually had to blink to ensure I was not hallucinating from sleep deprivation. Standing in the dimly lit reception area of my office, illuminated by the harsh glare of the emergency exit signs, were my mother and my sister. Patricia was wearing a dark trench coat over her expensive cashmere sweater, her hair tied back in a frantic, messy knot. Brittany was right behind her, dressed in a sleek black athletic outfit that looked like she had purchased it specifically to play the role of a glamorous cat burglar. They were not alone. Beside them stood a man wearing the gray uniform of the building's night janitorial staff. I watched through the camera as Patricia pulled a thick envelope of cash from her designer purse and shoved it into the janitor's hand. The man nodded nervously, swiped his master key card against the electronic scanner of my suite, and quickly walked away, disappearing down the corridor. My mother and sister were officially trespassing. They had just bribed a commercial building employee to gain unauthorized access to a secure corporate facility. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding with a sudden electric thrill. Isaiah might be a brilliant venture capitalist, but his arrogance had clearly infected his wife and mother-in-law. They genuinely believed I was on the verge of surrendering. They thought the media smear campaign had broken me. And because they were greedy and impatient, they had decided to accelerate the process by stealing what they believed was my only remaining leverage. Brittany pulled out her cell phone, holding it up to her ear. I tapped the audio icon on my security application, unmuting the highly sensitive microphones installed in the ceiling panels. "We are inside the suite," Brittany whispered loudly, her voice trembling with a mixture of terror and excitement. I could hear the tinny, distorted voice of Isaiah responding through her phone speaker, instructing her to find the physical hard drives. "Hurry up," Patricia hissed, grabbing Brittany by the arm and pulling her toward the frosted glass door that separated the reception area from my main workspace. "We just need to find the external drives. Isaiah said she keeps the master code on a physical backup. If we take the drives, she has absolutely nothing left to sell to Apex. She will have to drop the restraining order and sign the transfer agreement by tomorrow morning to get them back." I pressed my hand against my mouth to stifle a harsh, echoing laugh. It was a spectacular display of technological ignorance. Isaiah, in all his financial arrogance, actually believed a data scientist handling complex medical algorithms would keep a master copy of a $15 million proprietary code on a tangible, stealable hard drive sitting in a desk drawer. He had sent his wife and mother-in-law to steal a digital ghost. Brittany grabbed the brass handle of the inner glass door and pulled. It did not budge. I had installed a secondary biometric lock on that specific door. Patricia rattled the handle violently, her frustration boiling over. "It is locked," Patricia snapped. "Isaiah, the inner office is locked. How do we get in?" Through the audio feed, I heard Isaiah tell them to find a way inside no matter what it takes. He was completely blinded by greed, pushing them to commit a felony just to secure his payout. Patricia turned around, her eyes scanning the reception area. She spotted a heavy, solid metal base attached to a standing lamp near the waiting chairs. My mother, the woman who cared more about country club etiquette and suburban appearances than anything else in the world, marched over to the lamp. She unscrewed the heavy metal base, lifting it with both hands. "Mom, what are you doing?" Brittany gasped, taking a step back. "We are not losing $15 million because of a glass door," Patricia growled. She swung the heavy metal base directly into the center of the frosted glass. The impact was deafening. The tempered glass shattered instantly, exploding inward and showering my office carpet with thousands of glittering, sharp fragments. The piercing wail of the localized glass break alarm began to blare, a high-pitched siren that echoed through the empty commercial building. Patricia and Brittany completely ignored the alarm. They stepped carefully through the shattered frame, their designer shoes crunching over the broken glass, and rushed directly toward my main desk. They began pulling out drawers, frantically tossing files, empty flash drives, and stationery onto the floor. They were tearing my workspace apart with the desperate, frantic energy of wild animals looking for a meal. "Where is it?" Patricia yelled over the sound of the alarm, ripping the cables out of the back of my desktop monitor. "Find the black boxes. Find the storage drives." Brittany was throwing my reference books off the shelves, her breath coming in ragged, panicked gasps. "I do not see anything," she cried out. "There are just empty folders." I sat in my apartment watching the two women who had tormented me my entire life commit severe corporate sabotage on live high-definition video. They were destroying property. They were trespassing. They were actively searching for intellectual property to steal for financial extortion. The 48-hour deadline Apex Health had given me was no longer a death sentence. It was just enough time to watch my family walk straight into a prison cell. I leaned back in my chair, tracing the edge of my phone case. They wanted to play dirty. They wanted to break into my world and steal my future. I was going to make sure they never saw the outside of a courtroom again. I watched the high-definition feed as my mother and sister frantically tore my office apart. They were ripping open filing cabinets, dumping out perfectly organized client contracts, and throwing empty external drives onto the glass-covered floor. They were entirely consumed by their own greed, completely unaware that they were starring in a live broadcast that would end their freedom. I reached out and tapped the primary control panel on my security application. My finger hovered over the red icon labeled Lockdown Protocol. I did not hesitate. I pressed it firmly. Instantly, a loud mechanical hum echoed through the audio feed. At the front entrance of my office suite, heavy reinforced steel security shutters dropped from the ceiling, slamming into the floor with a terrifying metallic crash. The magnetic locks engaged simultaneously, securing the perimeter with thousands of pounds of force. The exit was completely sealed. Patricia froze, dropping a stack of manila folders. She spun around, staring at the steel shutters that had just trapped them inside. Brittany let out a sharp shriek of pure panic. She ran toward the shattered glass doorway, her designer sneakers slipping on the debris, and threw her weight against the secondary reinforced doors leading out to the hallway. They did not budge. Isaiah Brittany screamed into her phone, her voice cracking with absolute terror. The doors just locked. The metal gates came down. "We are trapped inside the office." I did not wait to hear Isaiah's panicked response. I picked up my cell phone and dialed 911. "Seattle Emergency Dispatch." A calm voice answered. "I need immediate police assistance at the commercial high-rise on 4th Avenue. I stated my voice perfectly level and devoid of any emotional tremor. "I am the founder of NeuroPredict Analytics. I am currently monitoring a live security feed of two intruders who have bribed building staff, shattered the glass entry doors, and are actively ransacking my corporate suite to steal intellectual property. I have engaged the remote lockdown protocol. They are trapped inside the main workspace." The dispatcher typed rapidly. "Units are being dispatched immediately to your location. Are the suspects armed?" "They are armed with an extreme sense of entitlement," I replied coldly, "but no firearms are visible." I kept the emergency operator on the line and turned my attention back to the monitor. Patricia was losing her mind. She was screaming at Brittany, blaming her for moving too slowly, blaming Isaiah for giving them terrible instructions. Brittany was hyperventilating, begging her husband over the phone to call the building management and get them out. Through the high-sensitivity microphones, I heard the heavy, echoing thud of police boots rushing down the commercial hallway. The muffled voices of Seattle police officers demanded access. I tapped another button on my application, remotely disengaging the outer steel shutters to let the authorities inside. The moment the shutters raised, 6 police officers swarmed into the reception area, their flashlights piercing the dim lighting. They drew their tasers, shouting aggressive commands through the shattered glass frame. "Put your hands in the air and step away from the desks," the lead officer roared. "Do it right now." Patricia threw her hands up her face, draining of all color. She immediately shifted into her favorite role, the innocent persecuted victim. "Officer, please, you do not understand," Patricia cried out, her voice trembling with manufactured tears. "I am the mother of the woman who owns this company. We are just looking for some family documents. This is a massive misunderstanding." The police officers did not care about her maternal status. They looked at the shattered glass, the ransacked office, and the panicked women standing in the middle of a destroyed corporate workspace. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back," the officer commanded, stepping through the broken glass and grabbing Patricia by the arm. "You cannot do this to me," Patricia shrieked, struggling against the officer's grip. "I am Patricia Reed. I am a respected member of this community. My daughter is a billionaire. She will have your badge for this. Let me go." The sharp, unmistakable click of metal handcuffs snapping shut echoed through my speakers. Brittany was sobbing hysterically as another officer secured her wrists behind her back. She dropped her phone onto the carpet. The call with Isaiah was still connected, broadcasting the entire arrest directly to his ear. "Isaiah, please help us," Brittany wailed as she was marched toward the exit. The line went dead. Isaiah had hung up. I watched the feed as the police cleared my office, leaving it empty and silent once again. I ended the call with the dispatcher, leaned back in my chair, and took a deep breath. My mother and sister were on their way to a holding cell facing felony charges for commercial burglary and corporate espionage. The 48-hour deadline Apex Health had given me was no longer a ticking time bomb. The people trying to steal my life's work were currently sitting in the back of a police cruiser. But the war was not entirely over. While Patricia and Brittany were taking the physical fall, the true architect of this disaster was still sitting safely in his luxury home. The next morning, the harsh reality of Isaiah Grant's desperation began to fully surface. Isaiah had not pushed my family to steal my algorithm merely out of standard corporate greed. He was drowning. He walked into the towering glass headquarters of his venture capital firm, his perfectly tailored suit doing an excellent job of hiding the cold sweat breaking out across his spine. For the past 2 years, Isaiah had been living a dangerous, fraudulent lie. Brittany's lavish lifestyle combined with a series of catastrophic investment failures had drained his personal accounts. To keep up the facade of the untouchable venture capitalist, Isaiah had quietly embezzled millions of dollars from his own firm's liquidity pools. He had moved the money through shell companies, assuming he could replace it before anyone noticed. But the firm had just scheduled a comprehensive quarterly audit for next week. The missing funds would be discovered. Isaiah needed a massive, untraceable cash injection immediately to cover his tracks and avoid federal prison. When he found out about my $15 million acquisition with Apex Health, he saw his salvation. He needed to extort that money to save his own life. He had brought his wife and mother-in-law into his scheme, using their greed to manipulate them into doing his dirty work. He believed he could force me to surrender, take his cut of the payout, and quietly replace the embezzled funds before the auditors arrived. Now sitting in his corner office, Isaiah stared at his computer screen in absolute horror. The morning news alerts were already flooding in. 2 prominent Seattle socialites had been arrested overnight for breaking into a tech startup. His wife was in jail. His mother-in-law was facing felony charges. His crude attempt at physical theft had failed spectacularly, and the extortion clock was ticking down to his own destruction. Isaiah realized that hiding behind his family was no longer an option. The legal maneuvers and the smear campaigns had not broken me. The physical break-in had ended in a disastrous arrest. He was out of pawns, out of time, and out of money. If the Apex Health deal did not close, and if he did not extract his share to cover the stolen venture capital funds, he was going to lose his career, his freedom, and his entire life. He picked up his office phone, his knuckles white as he gripped the receiver. He knew he had to face me directly. He had to use his final, most destructive weapon to force my hand before the executives at Apex Health completely walked away from the negotiation table. The morning after the arrests, the Seattle courthouse was a cathedral of cold marble and echoing footsteps. I walked through the heavy wooden doors beside my attorney Leo, carrying a pristine leather briefcase that held the absolute destruction of my family's remaining leverage. We were not there to negotiate. We were there to drop a legal guillotine. The emergency hearing for a strict protective order took exactly 14 minutes. Standing before a weary Superior Court judge, Leo presented the high-definition security footage from my office. The video played on a large monitor in the center of the courtroom. The judge watched in complete silence as Patricia and Brittany, accompanied by a bribed janitor, shattered the frosted glass of my corporate suite and ransacked my workspace. The police report filed just hours earlier confirmed the felony charges of commercial burglary and attempted corporate espionage. My mother and sister were sitting at the defense table. They had been bailed out of the holding cell by Richard just before dawn, and they looked absolutely hollowed out. Patricia was still wearing the same cashmere sweater from the night before, but it was now stained, wrinkled, and covered in fine glass dust. Her perfect hair was a tangled mess. Brittany sat completely slumped in her chair, staring at the mahogany table with bloodshot, swollen eyes. The arrogant, entitled women who had tried to steal my $15 million acquisition were gone, replaced by two terrified criminals facing the severe consequences of their actions. The judge did not offer them an ounce of sympathy. He looked over his reading glasses, his expression radiating absolute disgust. Based on the incontrovertible video evidence and the severity of the felony charges pending against the respondents, this court grants a full comprehensive restraining order, the judge declared, striking his gavel. Patricia Reed and Brittany Grant are hereby ordered to remain a minimum of 500 feet away from Morgan Reed, her personal residence, her corporate offices, and any location she frequents. Furthermore, all forms of contact, including digital communication, phone calls, and third-party messaging, are strictly prohibited. Any violation of this order will result in immediate arrest and incarceration without bail. I did not smile. I simply nodded to the judge, signed the paperwork Leo placed in front of me, and stood up. As I turned to leave the courtroom, Patricia looked up at me. Her lips parted as if she wanted to beg to use that familiar, manipulative, maternal tone to reel me back in. But the presence of two armed bailiffs standing directly behind her chair forced her to swallow her words. The legal boundary was now a physical reality of iron and concrete. They were legally banished from my existence. By the time Leo and I stepped out of the courthouse and onto the bustling Seattle sidewalk, the media landscape had violently shifted. The internet is a ruthless, unforgiving arena, and Brittany was about to experience the full devastating force of a public execution. During the night, while Brittany and Patricia were sitting in a sterile police holding cell, the King County Sheriff's Department processed their booking information. Mugshots are public record in the state of Washington. A sharp, ambitious local journalist had already cross-referenced the arrest logs with the viral social media video Brittany had posted just 24 hours earlier. The resulting news article dropped like a nuclear bomb across the digital world. The headline was plastered everywhere. Lifestyle influencer who claimed sister defrauded family, arrested for smashing into sister's corporate office to steal hard drives. The article featured two images placed side by side. On the left was a screenshot from Brittany's tearful victim playing video where she accused me of bankrupting our parents. On the right was her official police mugshot. Her mascara was smeared down her cheeks, her face was blotchy, and she held a booking placard bearing her full name and the felony charges. The hypocrisy was so spectacular, so undeniably profound, that the internet turned on her instantly. The same digital mob that had been screaming for my head yesterday was now tearing Brittany to shreds. I opened my phone as I got into the back of my hired car, watching her carefully curated digital empire collapse in real time. Her comment sections were a wasteland of mockery and outrage. Former fans were calling her a sociopathic liar, a thief, and a fraud. Dozens of users pointed out the sheer insanity of crying about a supposedly stolen family fortune while literally wearing a $5,000 designer athletic outfit to commit a corporate burglary. But the public humiliation was only the beginning of her downfall. Within 3 hours of the mugshot going viral, the corporate backlash began. Brittany had built her brand on a pristine, aspirational aesthetic. She relied heavily on sponsorships from high-end cosmetic lines, wellness companies, and luxury fashion brands. Corporate sponsors possess zero tolerance for brand ambassadors, facing felony burglary charges. I watched my screen as 4 major brand partners publicly severed ties with her company. They issued crisp, identical public relations statements, announcing the immediate termination of all contracts with Brittany Grant, citing clear violations of their morality clauses. Her upcoming product launches were canceled. Her affiliate links were deactivated. Her entire revenue stream evaporated before lunchtime. Richard and Patricia were entirely powerless to stop the bleeding. They had spent their entire lives treating Brittany as the golden child, inflating her ego and shielding her from the consequences of her profound financial incompetence. Now their golden child was a national laughingstock, her face plastered across gossip blogs and legal news sites alike. They were completely isolated, humiliated, and legally barred from ever coming near me again. I locked my phone screen and leaned my head against the cool leather seat of the car. I had successfully severed the emotional and physical ties to my family. They were trapped in their own self-inflicted misery, stripped of their weapons and their dignity. But I knew the war was not over yet. While my parents and my sister were drowning in the public relations disaster, Isaiah was still lurking in the shadows. His pawns had failed him. The violent break-in had only strengthened my legal standing and ruined his wife's career. He was running out of time, running out of money, and watching the $15 million acquisition slip further from his grasp. A cornered predator is always the most dangerous, and Isaiah was about to abandon the legal maneuvering and initiate a catastrophic scorched earth strategy to force my hand. Isaiah Grant sat alone in the darkened study of his sprawling Medina estate. The house was dead quiet. Upstairs, his wife Brittany was heavily medicated, weeping uncontrollably over her ruined social media empire and her impending felony trial. His mother-in-law, Patricia, was facing identical charges of commercial burglary and attempted corporate espionage, but Isaiah did not care about their freedom or their tears. He cared exclusively about the fast-approaching quarterly audit at his venture capital firm. The millions of dollars he had quietly embezzled from his own liquidity pools formed a noose that was rapidly tightening around his neck. The $15 million acquisition by Apex Health was his only remaining exit strategy. Since the brute force break-in had resulted in strict restraining orders and spectacular public humiliation, his pawns were officially off the board. He had to pivot to a far more sinister strategy. He poured himself a generous glass of bourbon, his razor-sharp mind calculating the next aggressive maneuver. If he could not win in a courtroom, he would win in the server room. Through his extensive, highly guarded network of Silicon Valley fixers, Isaiah tracked down a specific individual. He needed a digital mercenary, someone with intimate knowledge of Morgan's corporate architecture. Within hours, his contacts delivered exactly what he needed. They found a disgruntled former cloud infrastructure contractor who had worked for NeuroPredict Analytics during its earliest days. The contractor, a man named Colin, had been abruptly terminated by Morgan for repeatedly cutting corners on data encryption protocols. Colin was currently drowning in severe underground gambling debts, making him the perfect malleable target. Isaiah arranged a covert meeting at a discreet high-end cigar lounge in downtown Seattle. He arrived early, securing a private leather booth in the back corner, hidden behind a thick veil of cigar smoke. When Colin arrived looking nervous and thoroughly out of his depth, Isaiah did not waste time with pleasantries. He slid a thick, unmarked manila envelope across the polished mahogany table. Inside was $50,000 in untraceable, non-sequential cash, accompanied by a firm promise of $250,000 more once the objective was fully completed. Colin stared at the cash, his eyes wide with desperate greed. He did not even hesitate. He took the envelope, shoved it into his jacket, and immediately opened his laptop. Isaiah leaned forward, his dark eyes locked intensely on the glowing screen. He did not just want to steal the algorithm anymore. He wanted to forge a weapon of mass digital destruction. He needed a kill switch that would grant him absolute leverage. He instructed Colin to construct a highly sophisticated, completely untraceable backdoor malware. The malicious code was specifically engineered to infiltrate the predictive diagnostic models of Morgan's artificial intelligence. Colin typed furiously, his fingers dancing across the keyboard as he explained the technical mechanics of the attack. He detailed how the malware would invisibly alter the cellular mutation data parameters. It would force the artificial intelligence to generate catastrophically incorrect medical diagnoses. It would categorize benign cellular structures as malignant and flag terminal anomalies as perfectly healthy tissue. It would turn a life-saving healthcare tool into a lethal, unpredictable liability. For a massive conglomerate like Apex Health, a compromised diagnostic algorithm was a radioactive nightmare. It would expose their entire hospital network to billions of dollars in medical malpractice lawsuits. If Apex discovered even a fraction of this vulnerability during their final technical review, they would not just terminate the $15 million acquisition, they would report Morgan to federal regulators for attempting to sell fraudulent, life-threatening medical software. Colin explained to Isaiah that when he was terminated from NeuroPredict Analytics, he had secretly retained an outdated administrative access credential. It was a phantom backdoor he had built into the original Amazon Web Services staging environment, a ghost key that Morgan had allegedly forgotten to purge during her routine security audits. Colin quickly compiled the malicious payload, wrapping it in a stealth execution script to bypass standard firewall detections. He targeted what he firmly believed was the primary database architecture holding Morgan's highly coveted code. With a sharp, decisive tap of the Enter key, the covert upload commenced. A green progress bar filled the laptop screen, moving steadily as it bypassed the outer security layers. Within seconds, the system confirmed the malware had successfully breached the server and embedded itself deep within the root directory. The payload was perfectly concealed, disguised as a routine system update. Isaiah watched the confirmation message flash on the screen. A slow, terrifying smile spread across his handsome face. The power dynamic had instantly shifted back into his hands. He was no longer the desperate venture capitalist trying to scramble for loose change while his wife faced a prison sentence. He was holding a digital gun directly to Morgan's head. The malware was currently dormant, sitting silently in the dark, waiting for a single remote command to execute and destroy everything in its path. If Morgan refused to drop the felony charges against Brittany and Patricia, and if she refused to sign over 50% of the Apex payout, Isaiah would simply push the button. He would corrupt her entire life's work just hours before Apex Health conducted their final technical review. He would ensure she lost the deal, faced federal fraud charges, and ended up in a prison cell right alongside her mother and sister. Isaiah pulled out his sleek smartphone. He could not email or text Morgan directly, as his wife and mother-in-law were bound by the strict restraining order, and any written extortion could be easily traced by cybercrime units. He needed to look her in the eye. He needed to watch her break in real time. He bypassed her personal number and dialed the direct line of her attorney, Leo. When Leo answered, Isaiah kept his voice remarkably calm, dripping with lethal confidence. He demanded a face-to-face meeting with Morgan at a neutral location the very next day. He told Leo to relay a simple, devastating message to his defiant client. "Inform Morgan that I have the absolute keys to her kingdom," Isaiah stated smoothly. If she does not meet me tomorrow, her algorithm dies, and she takes the fall for the greatest medical fraud of the decade. Let us see how smart she really is. The meeting took place at a sterile, dimly lit coffee shop in the industrial district of Seattle, miles away from the bustling corporate centers where Isaiah normally operated. The rain lashed heavily against the large glass windows, blurring the gray cityscape outside. I walked through the front doors, my trench coat damp, my expression completely unreadable. My attorney Leo was sitting in an unmarked sedan, parked across the street, monitoring a secure audio feed transmitted through a tiny microphone pinned beneath my lapel. I was not walking into a trap blind. I was walking in to record a severe federal felony. Isaiah was sitting in a leather booth at the very back of the empty cafe. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit, a stark contrast to the worn-out surroundings. He looked like the picture of absolute control, casually sipping a dark espresso. But as I approached the table, my trained eyes caught the micro-expressions of a truly desperate man. His jaw was clenched tight enough to grind his teeth to dust. The subtle, erratic tapping of his expensive leather shoe against the floorboards betrayed the immense financial pressure crushing his lungs. He was drowning in his own embezzled corporate debt, and I was his only remaining life raft. I slid into the booth across from him. I did not order a drink. I did not take off my coat. I just stared at him with absolute glacial silence. You look remarkably confident for a woman who is exactly 24 hours away from federal prison, Isaiah said, his deep voice carrying a terrifying silky smoothness. He placed his espresso cup on the wooden table and leaned forward, clasping his hands together. I have to admit, Morgan, watching you orchestrate the arrest of my wife and your mother was a masterful tactical play. You completely humiliated them. You destroyed Britney's brand in a single afternoon. You effectively won the public relations war. But your fatal flaw is that you think small. You are playing checkers with human emotions while I am playing chess with digital infrastructure. Get straight to the point, Isaiah, I commanded, keeping my voice low and perfectly even. I do not have time for your corporate posturing. Isaiah smiled, a cold and predatory flash of white teeth. I hired a digital mercenary last night, he stated, his eyes locking onto mine with lethal intent. Specifically, I hired Colin, the incompetent network contractor you fired last year. It turns out you missed a very critical backdoor when you purged his administrative access. Through that ghost key, Colin uploaded a highly sophisticated, entirely untraceable malware payload directly into the root directory of your cloud server. Right now, a digital parasite is sitting dormant inside the core database of NeuroPredict Analytics. My breath caught in my throat. I forced my hands to remain still on my lap, ensuring my body language reflected genuine shock. He had bypassed the legal system entirely and gone straight for the technological jugular. Isaiah saw my reaction and leaned back visibly, thriving on the sudden power shift. It is a brilliant piece of malicious code. He continued, his tone almost conversational, which made the threat infinitely worse. It is designed to subtly alter your predictive diagnostic parameters. If I send the remote execution command from my phone, the malware will actively scramble the cellular mutation data. It will force your artificial intelligence to categorize benign tumors as highly malignant and flag terminal cancer cells as perfectly healthy tissue. It turns your revolutionary medical software into a random lethal liability. You have your final technical review with Apex Health scheduled for 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, Isaiah stated, checking his heavy luxury wristwatch. When their engineering team runs their definitive due diligence audit, they will test the algorithm using live medical data. If I push the button today, the software will fail catastrophically tomorrow. Apex Health will not just terminate the $15 million acquisition. They are legally obligated by federal law to report fraudulent medical technology to the government. You will lose the money, your reputation will be incinerated, and you will face decades in federal prison for attempting to sell a lethal diagnostic tool to a multinational hospital network. I stared at him, letting my breathing quicken just enough to simulate rising panic. What are your terms? I asked, forcing a slight desperate tremor into my voice to feed his monumental ego. My terms are absolute and non-negotiable, Isaiah said, pulling a folded legal document from his jacket pocket and sliding it across the polished table. First, you will immediately contact the district attorney and drop all felony commercial burglary charges against Brittany and Patricia. You will state on the official record that you gave them permission to enter the office and that the break-in was a massive misunderstanding. Second, you will sign this transfer agreement right now. It grants my venture capital firm 50% ownership of your patent rights and 50% of the immediate cash payout from Apex Health. That means $7.5 million wired directly into my offshore accounts the exact second the deal closes tomorrow morning. He leaned across the table, his dark eyes burning with absolute unyielding malice. You save my wife from a prison sentence, and you give me the capital I require to maintain my lifestyle. If you refuse, or if you try to alert the authorities, I will trigger the malware before you even walk out of this coffee shop. I will burn your life to the ground, Morgan. I will make sure you spend the rest of your youth in a federal penitentiary. Sign the paper or you lose everything. The silence in the coffee shop was deafening. I looked down at the contract resting on the table. Isaiah believed he had completely cornered me. He believed his ruthless corporate extortion had shattered my defenses. He had laid out his entire criminal conspiracy, detailing the cyber attack, the blackmail, and the financial demands directly into the hidden microphone, recording every single syllable. He thought he was watching me break, but he was actually watching me meticulously prepare the final devastating act of his absolute destruction. I stared down at the crisp white paper resting on the scratched wooden table. The silence in the coffee shop stretched out thick and heavy. Isaiah sat perfectly still, his dark eyes locked onto my face, waiting for the inevitable collapse. I knew exactly what I had to do. I had spent my entire childhood learning how to appease narcissists. I knew exactly how to feed their egos, how to make them feel infinitely powerful, and how to shrink myself down into a manageable, pathetic target. I let my shoulders slump forward. I took a sharp, jagged breath, allowing the air to catch in the back of my throat. I forced myself to think about the years of emotional neglect, the tearing of my diploma, the sheer cruelty of my parents. The tears came easily then. They welled up in my eyes and spilled over my cheeks in hot, rapid drops. I buried my face in my hands, letting out a broken, defeated sob that echoed faintly against the brick walls of the empty cafe. "You cannot do this to me, Isaiah," I whispered, my voice cracking perfectly as I looked up at him through a blur of tears. I spent 3 grueling years building that algorithm. I sacrificed my entire life, my savings, and my sanity. You cannot just burn it to the ground. It is all I have left. Isaiah smiled. It was not a sympathetic smile. It was the expression of a predator watching its prey bleed out. "I can do whatever I want, Morgan," he replied smoothly, taking a slow sip of his espresso. "I control the code now. You are just a passenger on a sinking ship. Sign the agreement, drop the charges against your mother and your sister, and you get to keep half your payout. Refuse, and you go to a federal penitentiary for medical fraud. It is a very simple equation for someone with your impressive academic credentials." I wiped my wet cheeks with the back of my trembling hand, looking at him with wide, terrified eyes. "I will give you the money." I choked out, my voice quivering with manufactured defeat. "I will drop the felony charges today. I will lift the restraining order immediately. But I cannot just sign this piece of paper here in a coffee shop. You work in venture capital, Isaiah. You know exactly how Apex Health operates. Their compliance department is incredibly strict. If I suddenly transfer 50% of a $15 million asset to a third-party holding company 12 hours before the final technical review, their lawyers will immediately flag it as extortion or corporate fraud. They will kill the deal on the spot, and neither of us will get a single dime." Isaiah frowned slightly, his sharp mind processing the corporate logistics. He knew I was right. Multinational conglomerates did not write eight-figure checks to sudden undocumented equity partners without triggering massive internal investigations and freezing all financial transfers. "We have to do this formally," I pleaded, leaning across the table and clasping my hands together in desperate submission. "We have to make it look entirely legitimate to the Apex executives. We need a joint meeting tomorrow morning at the Apex regional headquarters here in Seattle. We will bring the Apex legal team, you, my parents, and Brittany. I will tell the chief executive officer that the entire legal dispute was a massive family misunderstanding blown out of proportion. I will present the new contract as a formal family reconciliation and copyright sharing agreement. We will sign the transfer documents directly in front of the Apex board. It gives them a clean, uncontested chain of title, and it guarantees your venture capital firm receives the $7.5 million cleanly and legally without any regulatory red flags." I let out another calculated sob, dropping my gaze to the table, making myself look completely shattered. "Please, Isaiah. I just want this nightmare to be over. I cannot fight you anymore. I will give you whatever you want. Just do not trigger the malware. Let me save the deal so I can just walk away from this family forever." Isaiah stared at me, his dark eyes analyzing every single tear, every tremor in my voice, and every defensive posture of my body. His monumental arrogance completely blinded him to the trap. The idea of a formal, highly publicized corporate surrender appealed perfectly to his massive ego. He wanted to walk into the Apex boardroom as the victorious conqueror. He wanted to watch me humiliate myself in front of corporate billionaires while he secured his stolen fortune. "That is a surprisingly intelligent strategy for someone currently having a nervous breakdown," Isaiah said, leaning back in the leather booth and buttoning his bespoke suit jacket. "I accept your terms. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, we meet in the Apex boardroom. I will arrange for Brittany and Patricia to be there. You will call the district attorney today and officially retract the burglary complaints. If there is even a hint of police presence tomorrow, or if the Apex executives seem suspicious, I will execute the malware sequence before you can even blink." "Do not test me, Morgan." I nodded frantically, swiping at my wet face. "I promise," I whispered. "I will fix everything. Just please let me finish the acquisition." Isaiah stood up from the table, looking down at me with absolute contempt. "You finally learned your place in this family, Morgan," he said coldly. "See you tomorrow." He turned and walked out of the coffee shop, the bell above the door chiming lightly as he stepped out into the Seattle rain. He strode down the sidewalk with the confident, arrogant swagger of a man who believed he had just conquered the world. I remained in the booth for exactly 3 minutes. I kept my head down, staring at the scratched wooden table. When I was absolutely certain Isaiah's luxury vehicle had turned the corner and disappeared from view, I reached up and wiped the remaining tears from my face. My trembling hands instantly steadied, my ragged breathing slowed into a calm, measured rhythm. The terrified, broken facade vanished completely, replaced by a hardened, absolute focus. I stood up, adjusted my trench coat, and walked out of the coffee shop. I crossed the rain-slicked street and opened the passenger door of the unmarked sedan where my attorney was waiting. Leo sat in the driver's seat holding a digital audio recorder connected to the wireless receiver. He was grinning so widely it looked like his face might split in half. "Tell me the audio is clean," I said, buckling my seatbelt and staring straight ahead through the windshield. "It is flawless," Leo replied, tapping the side of the recording device. "We have him explicitly admitting to cyber-terrorism, corporate extortion, and blackmail. And you just successfully lured the entire criminal enterprise into a single, highly secure corporate boardroom." I leaned back against the headrest, a dark, predatory smile curving my lips. "Isaiah thinks he is bringing a gun to a corporate negotiation. He does not realize he is walking straight into a federal execution chamber. Draft the final blind trust transfer, Leo. The decoy is perfectly set. Tomorrow we burn them all to the ground." The morning light hit the towering glass facade of the Apex Health Regional Headquarters, casting sharp reflections across the polished concrete of the executive floor. I sat perfectly still in an ergonomic leather chair at the far end of the massive mahogany boardroom table. Beside me sat my attorney Leo, his pristine briefcase resting near his hands. At the head of the table sat Catherine, the chief executive officer of Apex Health, flanked by David, her lead acquisitions counsel, and a small army of corporate compliance officers. The room was absolutely silent, the tension so thick it felt like physical pressure in the air. We were waiting for the conquerors to arrive. Exactly at 9 o'clock, the heavy frosted glass doors swung open. My family walked into the room, moving with the synchronized predatory swagger of a victorious invading army. Isaiah led the procession. The African-American venture capitalist wore a bespoke navy blue suit, his posture radiating a terrifying, absolute arrogance. He looked like a man who had just successfully executed the greatest financial heist of the century. Right behind him marched my father, Richard, his chest puffed out, surveying the billionaire executives with a ridiculous sense of superiority. My mother, Patricia, followed closely, wearing a designer pantsuit and an expression of martyred grace, as if she had not spent the previous night in a county holding cell. And finally, there was Brittany. My sister looked physically exhausted, her face pale and her eyes darting nervously around the imposing corporate space, but she kept her chin tilted upward desperately, trying to project the image of a successful entrepreneur rather than a bailed-out felon. I had officially called the district attorney 2 hours earlier to drop the commercial burglary charges, paving the way for their release just before dawn. They believed my compliance was the ultimate white flag. They believed I had surrendered to Isaiah's digital terrorism. Richard did not even look at me as he approached the table. He completely ignored his daughter, the actual founder of the company they were discussing, and walked directly toward Catherine. He placed his hands flat on the mahogany surface, leaning forward, with the unearned confidence of a man used to bullying small business owners in suburban country clubs. "Good morning, Catherine," Richard announced, his voice booming through the quiet boardroom. "I am Richard Reed, the patriarch of this family. I want to personally apologize for the brief legal confusion over the past 2 days. My daughter Morgan is a talented programmer, but she is highly emotional and incredibly naive when it comes to the realities of high-level corporate commerce. She made some severe miscalculations regarding the ownership structure of her startup. Fortunately, the adults have stepped in to correct her mistakes. From this moment forward, you will be conducting all financial and technical negotiations directly with my son-in-law, Isaiah Grant. He speaks for our family, and he speaks for the algorithm." Catherine stared at my father. She did not blink. She did not offer her hand for him to shake. She simply looked at him with the cold, assessing gaze of a predator, analyzing a particularly loud, irrelevant insect. She then slowly shifted her eyes toward Isaiah. Isaiah stepped smoothly into the center of the room, effortlessly taking command of the space. He unbuttoned his suit jacket and offered a crisp, perfectly practiced corporate smile to the Apex Health executives. He placed a thick, leather-bound folder onto the table and slid it precisely toward the center. "Thank you, Richard," Isaiah said, his deep voice filling the room with manufactured charm. "Catherine, David, it is a pleasure to finally meet you both. I know the temporary restraining order caused a brief panic within your compliance department, but I am pleased to announce that the Reed family has reached a comprehensive, legally binding reconciliation. We are here today to provide Apex Health with a completely clean, uncontested chain of title for the acquisition of NeuroPredict Analytics." Isaiah began pacing slowly behind my chair, treating me like a prop in his masterful presentation. He placed a heavy hand on my shoulder, his fingers digging painfully into my collarbone. I forced myself to look down at the table, maintaining my facade of total broken submission. "As Richard mentioned, Morgan is a brilliant coder." Isaiah continued, his tone dripping with condescending praise. "But no successful technology is built in a vacuum. Morgan utilized significant familial resources to construct the foundation of her artificial intelligence. Hardware seed capital and proprietary industry strategies were provided by the family trust. Morgan initially attempted to bypass these contributions out of a misguided sense of independence. However, after a very thorough family discussion yesterday afternoon, Morgan has formally acknowledged her sister Brittany as a 50% equity partner in this venture. Brittany sat up straighter in her chair, offering the board members a bright plastic smile. I am just so thrilled we could come together as a family to share this amazing medical technology with the world. Brittany lied flawlessly. Isaiah moved away from my chair and returned to his spot across the table, his dark eyes locking onto Catherine. He was preparing to deliver the veiled threat, the subtle reminder of the digital gun he was holding to my head. The document I just placed on the table is a fully executed copyright sharing agreement, Isaiah stated, tapping the leather folder. Once your legal team signs off on this updated equity structure, the $15 million acquisition can proceed exactly as planned. Half the funds will be routed to Morgan, and half will be transferred directly to my venture capital holding firm on behalf of my wife. I assure you, Catherine, it is in everyone's absolute best interest to finalize this immediately. As part of this new family partnership, I have personally taken over the security architecture of the algorithm. Isaiah paused, his gaze shifting momentarily to me before returning to the chief executive officer. It was the flex of a monster showing off his teeth. Medical software requires rigorous active oversight, Isaiah explained smoothly. I currently hold the master security keys to the core database. I am personally monitoring the data integrity of the predictive models. If we conclude this business today with everyone on the same page, I guarantee the algorithm will pass your final technical review this afternoon with flawless precision. We deliver a perfect product, you deliver the funds, and we all walk away victorious. Isaiah leaned back, crossing his arms over his chest. He looked around the room, basking in his own perceived brilliance. He had laid out the terms of his extortion wrapped in beautiful corporate jargon. He was the king of the world, untouchable and supreme. My father nodded proudly. My mother smiled with greedy anticipation. Brittany practically vibrated with excitement. They were seconds away from stealing $7.5 million. I kept my head bowed, staring at the polished wood of the table. I listened to their arrogance, their lies, and their absolute certainty that they had crushed me. My hands rested quietly on my lap, my pulse perfectly steady. The trap was fully loaded, the bait had been swallowed, and the execution was about to begin. The silence in the massive boardroom was absolute. It stretched on for 10 agonizing seconds, following Isaiah's arrogant declaration of victory. The air felt incredibly thin, vibrating with the silent, unseen tension of a trap snapping shut. I did not look at my father. I did not look at my mother or my sister. I slowly reached out with my right hand and picked up the crystal glass of ice water resting perfectly on the polished mahogany table in front of me. I brought the cool glass to my lips and took a long, deliberate sip. The ice clinked softly against the crystal. I lowered the glass and set it back down on the matching coaster. The sharp, singular sound echoed like a gunshot across the quiet room. I lifted my chin. I dropped the broken, submissive posture I had maintained since walking through the doors. I sat up perfectly straight, rolling my shoulders back and locked eyes directly with Catherine at the head of the table. I gave her one microscopic, decisive nod. Catherine did not reach for the leather folder Isaiah had so confidently slid across the table. She did not even glance at the fraudulent copyright sharing agreement. Instead, the chief executive officer of Apex Health leaned back in her ergonomic chair, resting her hands calmly on her lap. Her sharp, predatory gaze remained fixed on the venture capitalist standing at the center of her boardroom. Your presentation is highly illustrative. Isaiah, Catherine stated, her voice as cold and hard as a glacier. It paints a very specific picture of family dynamics and corporate security. However, before my legal team reviews any sudden equity transfers, I believe it is vital that we review a recent technical addendum provided by Morgan. David, if you please. David, the lead acquisitions counsel for Apex, did not say a single word. He simply tapped a command onto his digital tablet. Instantly, the motorized blackout shades on the floor-to-ceiling windows began to hum, descending rapidly and plunging the bright room into an intense cinematic darkness. The massive wall panel behind Catherine illuminated with a brilliant white light as the hidden overhead projector powered on. The screen did not display a complex financial spreadsheet or a line of proprietary code. It displayed a simple, stark audio waveform interface. A bright green playback line sat at the 0-second mark. Isaiah frowned, a flicker of genuine confusion crossing his handsome, arrogant face. He glanced down at me, searching for a sign of panic, but I just stared back at him with eyes as dead and cold as the bottom of the ocean. David pressed the execute button on his tablet. The state-of-the-art surround sound speakers embedded in the boardroom ceiling crackled to life. The audio quality was absolutely flawless, captured by the high-definition hidden microphone I had worn under my lapel at the coffee shop just 24 hours earlier. The faint, ambient sound of rain hitting a glass window filled the corporate space, followed immediately by a voice. It was a deep, silky, terrifyingly confident voice. It was unmistakably the voice of Isaiah Grant. "You look remarkably confident for a woman who is exactly 24 hours away from federal prison," the recorded voice of Isaiah echoed powerfully across the room. The physical reaction from my family was instantaneous. Richard jolted in his chair, his eyes snapping wide open in utter shock. Patricia gasped loudly, her hand flying to her throat as she recognized her son-in-law's voice. Brittany froze, her posture going completely rigid. But Isaiah was the true spectacle. The smug, victorious smirk vanished from his face, as if it had been violently ripped away. His dark skin visibly paled, turning an ashen, sickly shade of gray. He took a sudden, staggering step backward, his expensive leather shoe slipping slightly against the polished concrete floor. The recording continued, merciless and crystal clear. "I hired a digital mercenary last night," the audio playback boomed, filling every corner of the silent boardroom. "Specifically, I hired Colin, the incompetent network contractor you fired last year. Through that ghost key, Colin uploaded a highly sophisticated, entirely untraceable malware payload directly into the root directory of your cloud server." Every single corporate attorney sitting along the walls of the Apex boardroom simultaneously stopped taking notes. They stared at Isaiah with the cold, calculating eyes of executioners, watching a man confess to a capital crime. "It will force your artificial intelligence to categorize benign tumors as highly malignant," the recorded. Isaiah boasted, his own words now forming a perfectly constructed noose around his neck. "And flagged terminal cancer cells as perfectly healthy tissue. It turns your revolutionary medical software into a random lethal liability." I watched Isaiah's hands begin to tremble. His perfectly tailored suit suddenly looked like a straitjacket. He looked wildly around the room, searching for an exit, searching for a way to spin the narrative, but the walls were rapidly closing in. He had walked into the headquarters of a multinational healthcare conglomerate and admitted on tape to planting a lethal virus inside their highly anticipated medical acquisition. "You will sign this transfer agreement right now," the audio recording commanded, capturing the exact moment the extortion reached its absolute peak. "It grants my venture capital firm 50% ownership of your patent rights and 50% of the immediate cash payout from Apex Health. If you refuse or if you try to alert the authorities, I will trigger the malware before you even walk out of this coffee shop. I will make sure you spend the rest of your youth in a federal penitentiary." David tapped his tablet again. The audio cut off instantly. The bright white light of the projector screen illuminated the absolute devastation written across the faces of my family. The silence that followed was suffocating. It was the sound of complete, unrecoverable destruction. Richard was breathing heavily, his chest heaving as he stared at Isaiah in a state of absolute paralyzed horror. He finally understood that the man he had trusted to secure the family fortune had just confessed to federal cyber terrorism on the record. Patricia was physically shaking, tears of genuine panic welling in her eyes. Brittany looked like she was about to vomit, her hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly her fingernails were digging into the wood. I slowly pushed my chair back and stood up. I smoothed the front of my blazer, feeling the intoxicating rush of absolute power coursing through my veins. I walked around the massive mahogany table, my heels clicking loudly against the concrete until I stood directly in front of the trembling venture capitalist. Isaiah stared at me, his eyes wide with a feral trapped terror. He opened his mouth to speak, to offer some desperate fabricated defense, but no words came out. His brilliant financial mind was completely short-circuiting under the sheer magnitude of his legal exposure. "You told me I was playing checkers while you were playing chess," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet room like a serrated blade. I kept my tone perfectly even, completely stripped of any anger or sorrow. "You told me that I was out of my depth. You told my parents that you were the only one smart enough to handle this negotiation. But you forgot the most fundamental rule of data science, Isaiah. Numbers do not lie, and audio files do not forget." I turned my back on him and looked directly at the chief executive officer of Apex Health. Catherine was smiling. It was a terrifying, beautiful smile. The trap had been flawlessly executed. The arrogant predator who had tried to hold a $15 million medical acquisition hostage was now standing entirely defenseless in the center of the slaughterhouse, waiting for the final fatal blow. The sheer panic radiating from Isaiah was palpable. He opened his mouth to speak desperately, trying to formulate a defense, but his throat was completely dry. He looked toward his high-priced legal counsel, but the lawyers had already physically distanced themselves, pushing their chairs back from the mahogany table. They knew a sinking ship when they saw one, and they were not going to drown with him. I walked back to where Leo was sitting. My attorney reached into his briefcase and handed me a thick, heavy stack of bound legal and technical documents. I carried them back to the center of the room. With a sharp, violent motion, I slammed the entire stack down directly on top of Isaiah's fraudulent copyright sharing agreement. The resounding slap of paper against wood made Brittany jump out of her seat. "Did you honestly believe I would leave my life's work exposed to a disgruntled former contractor?" I asked, my voice echoing with absolute authority. "Did you really think I would build a $15 million medical technology and forget to secure the back door?" Isaiah stared at the documents, a single bead of cold sweat trailing down the side of his face. "The server directory Colin hacked into last night was not the core database," I explained, watching the final fragments of Isaiah's arrogance crumble into dust. "It was a honeypot. It was a completely sterile, isolated decoy server environment that I custom-built the moment I fired him. It looks exactly like the primary infrastructure, but it contains absolutely zero real medical data. It is a digital cage, Isaiah. You paid $50,000 to upload a lethal malware payload into an empty box. Your virus is currently sitting in a quarantine zone surrounded by monitoring scripts that tracked the upload directly back to Colin's Internet Protocol address, which the federal authorities are currently tracing back to you." Isaiah swayed on his feet. His hands gripped the edge of the table as his knees threatened to buckle. He turned his desperate, bloodshot eyes toward the chief executive officer of Apex Health. "Catherine," he stammered, his deep voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched wheeze. "The injunction, the court order froze her assets. She cannot legally sell you the algorithm. The contract is void. My family still has a claim." Catherine simply smiled, resting her chin on her steepled fingers. She did not say a word. She just looked at me, giving me the floor to deliver the execution. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the stack of documents. "That brings us to your second catastrophic miscalculation, Isaiah. You spent thousands of dollars in legal fees to file an emergency restraining order against NeuroPredict Analytics. You thought you successfully locked down my assets and blocked this acquisition." I picked up the top document from the stack and held it up for my family to see. The bold black ink at the top read, "Certificate of Transfer and Irrevocable Assignment. NeuroPredict Analytics has been an empty shell company for exactly 14 days. I stated the cold, hard truth, hitting the room like a physical shockwave. 2 weeks ago, the moment Apex Health finalized their internal valuations, I transferred the absolute entirety of my intellectual property, every single line of code, every patent, and every proprietary algorithm, into a fully anonymous blind trust registered in Delaware. My father, Richard, let out a choked, breathless gasp. He grabbed his chest, his face turning a dangerous pale shade of gray. Patricia covered her mouth with both trembling hands, her eyes wide with mounting horror. The algorithm does not belong to me anymore. I continued, my voice steady and completely relentless. And it certainly never belonged to this family. Apex Health purchased the technology directly from that blind trust. The financial transfer was authorized, cleared, and officially closed prior to you even serving me with those ridiculous court papers. The $15 million is already sitting safely in a highly secured, untraceable offshore account. Your aggressive bad faith lawsuit managed to freeze absolutely nothing. You locked the doors to an empty house. Brittany let out a loud, wretched sob. She collapsed forward onto the table, burying her face in her arms as the reality of her impending bankruptcy crashed down upon her. There was no bailout. There was no stolen fortune to save her failing cosmetics brand. She was going to lose everything, and she was going to do it with a felony commercial burglary charge permanently attached to her name. I looked at the four of them, absorbing the absolute devastation I had just inflicted. They had spent my entire life telling me I was a failure. They had treated me like a burden, an embarrassment, an ugly college dropout who would never amount to anything. They had tried to exploit my grief, steal my achievements, and weaponize my own emotions against me. There is no family reconciliation today. I announced, my voice dropping to a low, lethal whisper that demanded the attention of every single executive in the room. There is no copyright sharing agreement. There is no equity split for Brittany. There is no rescue fund for your failing venture capital firm, Isaiah. I turned my back on my family and looked directly at Catherine and David. I walked over to the head of the table, picking up a sleek silver fountain pen, resting next to a single beautifully bound contract. I did not ask you to come here today to negotiate a surrender. I told my parents, refusing to even glance in their direction. I asked you to come here so you could watch me take my seat at the table you said I would never reach. I clicked the pen open. I leaned down and signed my name with bold, sweeping strokes across the bottom of the employment contract. I capped the pen and set it down, the sharp click echoing through the silence of their total defeat. Today is my official inauguration, I declared, standing tall and buttoning my tailored blazer. I am the new director of data science for Apex Health, and you are just trespassing in my building. The collapse of the Reed family was instantaneous and absolute. Richard slumped back into his leather chair, his arrogant posture completely shattered, looking like a broken, defeated old man. Patricia was weeping openly, her mascara running down her face in dark, ugly streaks, as she realized she had just lost her daughter and her financial security in a single devastating blow. Brittany was hyperventilating, her loud, gasping sobs filling the sterile corporate air. But Isaiah was the true portrait of ruin. He stood frozen, his eyes glazed over, staring at the empty space in front of him. His venture capital career was over. His embezzled millions would be discovered by the auditors on Monday morning. The audio recording of his extortion plot was currently sitting in the hands of a dozen corporate attorneys who were obligated by federal law to report him. He had tried to play God with my life, and he had just orchestrated his own spectacular funeral. The chief executive officer of Apex Health did not even blink as the reality of Isaiah's complete destruction settled over the boardroom. Catherine simply turned her head and gave a slight approving nod to David, the lead acquisitions counsel. David stood up from his leather chair, buttoning his suit jacket with the calm, practiced efficiency of a corporate executioner. He looked directly at the trembling venture capitalist who had just tried to hold a multinational healthcare conglomerate hostage. You severely misunderstood the legal obligations of a publicly traded entity, David stated, his voice ringing with absolute chilling authority. The moment we heard the audio recording of your extortion plot, our compliance team initiated a mandatory federal reporting protocol. Apex Health does not negotiate with cyber terrorists. We report them. While you were busy delivering your arrogant presentation, my office was on a secure line with the Seattle Police Department, and the Regional Enforcement Division of the Securities and Exchange Commission. Right on cue, the heavy frosted glass doors of the boardroom swung open for the second time that morning. They were not opened by corporate assistants. Two uniformed Seattle police officers strode into the room, flanked immediately by two federal agents wearing dark suits and severe expressions. The atmosphere in the room shifted from corporate tension to a genuine criminal takedown. Isaiah Grant, one of the federal agents, announced, pulling a badge from his jacket pocket. "You are under arrest for corporate extortion, economic espionage, and severe violations of federal insider trading laws. Place your hands behind your back immediately." Isaiah did not fight. The arrogant, untouchable financial predator was entirely broken. His shoulders slumped in total defeat as a police officer forcefully turned him around, pulling his arms behind his back. The sharp, heavy click of steel handcuffs snapping shut around his wrists echoed violently through the silent boardroom. His bespoke navy blue suit suddenly looked like a cheap costume. His entire career, his reputation in Silicon Valley, and his freedom evaporated in that single metallic sound. He was going to a federal penitentiary, and his life as he knew it was officially over. Brittany let out a piercing, hysterical scream as she watched her husband being marched out of the corporate headquarters in steel cuffs. She lunged forward, sobbing wildly, but Patricia grabbed her arm, pulling her back. My mother was trembling uncontrollably, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. Richard stood completely frozen, his jaw hanging open, his chest heaving as the catastrophic reality of their failed heist finally registered in his mind. I did not offer them a single word of comfort. I simply turned my back on them, gathered my documents, and walked out of the boardroom alongside Leo, leaving my biological family to drown in the absolute wreckage of their own spectacular greed. The karmic retribution that followed over the next 3 months was swift, comprehensive, and ruthlessly complete. My parents had gambled their entire financial security on a bad faith lawsuit, fully believing they could bully me into submission to afford the exorbitant retainer for the aggressive corporate litigation firm that filed the frivolous injunction. Richard and Patricia had taken out a massive, high-interest second mortgage on their sprawling suburban home. When the injunction was vacated and the true nature of their extortion was exposed, the law firm immediately dropped them as clients and demanded full immediate payment for their accumulated billable hours. Richard and Patricia had absolutely no way to pay the staggering legal debt. Without the $15 million payout they had planned to steal from me, their finances imploded. The bank moved aggressively, initiating foreclosure proceedings. I monitored the public real estate listings with a cold, detached satisfaction the day the bright red foreclosure notice was nailed to their custom mahogany front door. They lost the house they prized above all else. They were forced to pack their luxurious belongings into cheap cardboard boxes and move into a tiny rundown apartment on the outskirts of the city. Their wealthy country club friends completely abandoned them, unwilling to associate with individuals involved in a highly publicized federal cybercrime scandal. They became pariahs, stripped of the superficial status they had valued more than their own daughter. Brittany faced an even darker reality. With her husband sitting in a federal holding cell awaiting trial, the authorities seized every single one of their joint financial assets to pay back the millions Isaiah had embezzled from his venture capital firm. Her luxury vehicles were repossessed. Her designer wardrobe was liquidated. Her entire lifestyle influencer empire was reduced to absolute ashes. Brand partners sued her for breach of contract, and her upcoming felony trial for commercial burglary ensured she would never secure another sponsorship deal again. She was left entirely bankrupt, disgraced, and utterly alone. As for me, I walked out of the Apex Health building that morning and stepped into a completely new universe. I had spent 33 years suffocating under the weight of their conditional love and endless criticism. They had called me a disappointment, an ugly dropout, and a failure. But I had used pure logic, relentless patience, and cold data to construct an impenetrable fortress that completely destroyed them. I stood on the expansive wrap-around balcony of my brand-new luxury penthouse, the evening wind whipping through my hair. I held a glass of expensive red wine, looking down at the glittering, endless expanse of the Seattle skyline. The lights of the city sparkled like crushed diamonds against the dark water of the Puget Sound. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine, savoring the rich, complex flavor. The heavy, toxic chain that had bound me to my family was finally severed. I was no longer the scapegoat. I was the director of data science for a multinational conglomerate, a multi-millionaire, and a woman who had successfully defended her life's work against the ultimate betrayal. I felt a profound, overwhelming sense of absolute peace. When blood becomes a parasite, cutting them off is liberation. You do not owe your success, your sanity, or your future to people who only view you as a resource to be exploited. Have you ever had to use absolute coldness to protect yourself from the people who were supposed to love you? Share your story in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe for more stories of ultimate retribution and the courage to finally walk away. Society conditions us to believe that family is an unbreakable bond, a guaranteed sanctuary of unconditional love and perpetual forgiveness. However, the most profound lesson extracted from this ordeal is that shared DNA does not automatically grant someone a lifelong, all-access pass to your life, your mental peace, or your hard-earned success. When blood relatives morph into parasites utilizing weaponized guilt and relentless manipulation to extract your resources, walking away is never an act of betrayal. It is the ultimate necessary act of self-preservation. Narcissists and emotional manipulators thrive entirely in the chaotic realm of human emotion. They use screaming matches, public humiliation, and aggressive gaslighting to keep their targets completely off balance. The only way to permanently defeat this specific brand of toxicity is with absolute cold precision. Hard data, strict legal boundaries, and meticulously archived receipts are completely immune to emotional manipulation. Building a fortress of undeniable facts strips abusers of their favorite weapons. A toxic parent can always try to argue with your memories, but they can never argue with a certified bank statement, a verified cloud server log, or a legally binding federal contract. For decades, the personal narrative of a family scapegoat is dictated by people who desperately need a designated failure in the room just to feel powerful. The pivotal moment of true liberation arrives when you finally realize your intrinsic worth is not a cheap commodity for your family to appraise. You absolutely do not owe your abusers a seat at the table you built with your own bare hands, and letting them face the natural devastating consequences of their own unchecked greed is not cruelty. It is simply justice taking its natural course. Have you ever had to establish an ironclad boundary to protect your peace from toxic relatives? And how did that defining decision completely transform your life?